Was I expelled from Hogwarts? Hey, fanfic family. So glad to see you here again to continue this incredible adventure. As always, kindly remember, this story is 100% fiction. So don't go looking for dimensional portals in your closet. All rights to this fantastic novel belong to the original author. We're just your humble narrators of epic tales. Are you enjoying the fanfic? Show it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and dropping us a like. And if you're impatient for more exclusive content, our Patreon is your happy place. Chapter 526 The Black Magic Mark. Standing in the tent, Fudge stared dumbfounded at Barty Crouch Jr., then glanced at his father, Barty Crouch Sr., completely dumbfounded. Fudge really wanted to slap someone to prove he wasn't dreaming. But looking around, even Umbridge, usually the most submissive of them all, was keeping his distance, not wanting to be hit. After all, this kind of thing might be considered playful in bed, but in public it was an insult. Fudge had nowhere to vent his emotions, so he could only stare intently at Barty Crouch Jr., a man dead for 13 years, actually resurrected. Who would believe it? Wait, that sounds so familiar, didn't it? Fudge was practically numb. First Peter Pettigrew, then Barty Crouch Jr., these damn Death Eaters, taking turns being resurrected, are they kidding me? If this continued, what if Ralph suddenly told him that Voldemort had also been resurrected? Fudge felt he might be completely unfazed, maybe even laugh. Compared to the hot-tempered Fudge, Dumbledore appeared much calmer. After listening quietly to Barty Crouch Jr.'s account, he asked, "Barty, is what he said true?" Crouch remained silent, and Dumbledore simply looked at him calmly, saying nothing and waiting quietly. After a moment of silence, Crouch nodded slightly, his voice hoarse. "Yes, I did it all, Albus. I took my wife to Azkaban, and Aisha took Polyjuice Potion to replace Barty Crouch Jr. The Dementors have no eyes, they only smelled a healthy man and a dying man entering Azkaban, and then smelled a healthy man and a dying man leaving. They didn't know that they had been switched." Fudge laughed mockingly. "I always thought the great Barty Crouch was a man of strong will, uncompromising, and who valued honor more than life itself. I never imagined he was such a hypocrite." "I had no choice," Crouch said bitterly. After Barty Crouch Jr. was captured, Aisha was consumed by grief, and her health quickly deteriorated. "No matter what we did, that night, she begged me, saying that her son was still young, and it would be such a terrible and cruel thing for him to die in Azkaban. She wanted to replace Barty Crouch Jr. with herself. I told her she was insane," Crouch murmured softly, more to himself than to those present. "Aisha told me, she's dying, and her last wish is for me to help her. If I don't, she'll never forgive me." Crouch's eyes snapped open, his hoarse voice filled with deep anguish. "Because of my work, my marriage with my wife has been half spent in separation, half in arguments, but I've always loved her. Her last wish, in the end, my emotions overwhelmed my reason. I abandoned all honor, but I don't regret it." "Then you and your damn son can stay in Azkaban forever," Fudge snarled. Crouch wasn't afraid. Instead, he let out a long sigh of relief. This lie had haunted him for 13 years, still frequently tormenting his dreams. Finally, he could sleep soundly. He looked at Ralph, who was sitting a little further away drinking tea, and said in a hoarse voice, "Mr. Scamander, I apologize for my previous rudeness." Ralph shook his head and said calmly, "Crouch, you shouldn't apologize to me. You should apologize to Bertha Jorkins. You cast the Oblivion Charm on her, causing permanent damage to her memory. You ruined her life." Crouch sat blankly on the sofa. Ralph, Dumbledore, and Fudge walked out of Crouch's tent together. "I can't believe Crouch would do something like this," Fudge continued to ramble. "By the way, Ralph, how did you find out that Barty Crouch Jr. was still alive?" Ralph had already prepared for this question. He took an eyeball out of his pocket and said softly, "I accidentally saw Barty Crouch Jr. when I was studying it in the camp." "Mad Eye's eye, how did it end up in your hands?" Fudge was full of surprise. "It's not Mad Eye's evil eye," Ralph shook his head. "It's the evil eye I bought from Borgin Burke, but it was already broken." "I can confirm that," Dumbledore said. "Ralph even asked me how to repair it when we were in Berlin, so, discovering Barty Crouch Jr. was just a coincidence." Fudge breathed a sigh of relief. He had almost thought the boy knew everything. Seeing the group chatting, Umbridge hesitated, then finally interrupted them, saying in a coquettish voice, "Mr. Fudge, according to the schedule, the Quidditch World Cup final is supposed to start at 7:30, But it's almost 8 o'clock now. Everyone's waiting for you." Fudge's expression changed drastically. Because of Crouch, he had completely forgotten about the World Cup. He cried out anxiously, "Quick, quick, we need to get to the stadium." "You all go ahead," Dumbledore said. "I'll take Crouch back to the Ministry first, okay?" Inside the Quidditch stadium, a deafening roar could be heard, like a pot of porridge boiling over. This was the Quidditch World Cup final, and to delay it for half an hour was truly outrageous. Therefore, the boos and curses of nearly 100,000 wizards created a tremendous noise. Ludo Bagman, the commentator for the evening, sat in his penthouse box, waiting for Fudge while vividly describing the capture of Crouch. When Ralph said Barty Crouch Jr. was still alive, Crouch was terrified, and he immediately drew his wand, and then, Ginny quickly pressed. Ron, George, and Fred were also listening intently. In the blink of an eye, Ralph punched Crouch in the face, knocking out all his teeth. Lucius Malfoy and Narcissa Malfoy exchanged a shocked glance upon hearing Ludo's words. Barty Crouch Jr. was alive? Harry had heard the story from Sirius Black not long ago, and he wasn't listening to Ludo anymore, focusing instead on the Malfoy family. Harry was surprised to find that Draco Malfoy hadn't come to the final. This was very unusual. "Ludo, Minister Fudge is here," Arthur Weasley suddenly called out. Finally, Ludo stood up, walked to the box door, and looked down. Sure enough, he saw Fudge and his group standing in the center of the stadium. Fudge, who had rushed there, didn't even have time to go to the top tier of the box. He drew his wand, pointed to his throat, and panted, loud voice, then, his words echoed like thunder throughout the entire stadium. "Let's get started." Ludo received the order, his voice echoing throughout the stadium, resounding to every corner of the stands. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to the 422nd Quidditch World Cup Final." The audience finally stopped cursing and erupted in cheers and applause. "Alright, enough chit-chat. Let's welcome the Irish national team's mascot." Fudge saw Rove preparing to walk up the stairs towards the VIP box and quickly grabbed him, laughing loudly. "Rove, stand here, watch the mascot's performance first. This is the best viewing spot, even better than the top-tier box. There'll be a surprise later." Rove nodded and stood in the center of the field with Fudge, looking up at the sky. Then, with a whoosh, a huge object flew into the stadium, like a giant comet. It circled the stadium once, then split into two smaller comets, each heading towards a set of goalposts. Suddenly, an arched rainbow appeared across the entire stadium, connecting the two gleaming giant balls. A gasp of amazement erupted from the crowd, as if watching a fireworks display. Then, the rainbow vanished, and the shimmering spheres connected and merged, forming a gigantic, dazzling, green skull. Rolf stared in astonishment at the green skull. This was a surprise, thanks to the generous donor book friend 20230306220833687 for the donation. Chapter 527 Harpy. Before 100,000 spectators, a colossal skull composed of countless emerald green dots bloomed in the sky. The skull's eyes gleamed like embers glowing red in a brazier, and a python emerged from its mouth before disappearing back in. It quickly rose into the sky, climbing higher and higher, finally piercing the clouds and entering the night sky, reflected against the enormous, pale moon, like a grotesque and twisted ghost. Fudge stared blankly at the familiar image, thinking he was seeing things, rubbing his eyes hard. But the green skull remained a green skull, not transforming into the green shamrock symbolizing Ireland. Despite the heat of the night, Fudge shivered, his face was deathly pale, and his hands trembled. "The dark mark?" he asked Umbridge beside him in a questioning tone, seemingly hoping to hear a different answer. But Alice. Umbridge, gazing fearfully at the sky, whispered, "It's the dark mark, Minister." Fudge's heart sank off a cliff, the sudden panic made him dizzy, his legs gave way, and he collapsed to the ground. A sudden commotion erupted in the audience, filled with shrill screams and terrified whimpers. Even after 13 years, many wizards recognized that unforgettable dark mark at a glance. But those voices were scattered and too faint, quickly drowned out by the more excited shouts. 100,000 spectators, only a small fraction were British wizards, the majority came from all over the world. They didn't recognize the dark mark at all, let alone know the terrifying meaning it represented. Of course, even if they did, they wouldn't care. After all, one isn't intimidated by fear one has never experienced. The audience screamed like wild beasts in heat, urging Bulgaria's mascot, the Vila, to appear quickly. Rolf stared at the dark mark in the sky, his face grave. In the original timeline, the Death Eaters attacked the camp in the middle of the night, but upon seeing the dark mark, they scattered in terror. That dark mark was actually the work of Barty Crouch Jr., but he had already been captured. Who then created this masterpiece? Could it be the dark wizard who attacked him that night? Ralph had no time to ponder the culprit, nor did he care about the Quidditch match. He took off, soaring into the sky towards the top floor box where Newt and the others were. A sharp-eyed little girl caught a glimpse of this scene. Pointing to the sky, she shouted, "Mommy, that big brother is flying." Meanwhile, the 7 Bulgarian players were already fully prepared, holding firebolts, standing in the players' tunnel, waiting for the match to begin while enjoying the spectacle. "Is this Ireland's mascot?" Batter Volkov frowned, staring at the skull in the sky. "Why does it look so hellish?" "Who knows?" Goalkeeper Zagreb crossed his arms, licked his lips, and chuckled. "This art is certainly a bit ahead of its time, but I like it. I've decided. I'm going to get it tattooed on my shapely butt." "Tattoos can be niche, but they can't be sinister," Volkov teased. "Zagreb, if you get this tattooed on your butt, I'll go weak at the knees every time I see it." "How am I supposed to get through your back door then?" Volkov's words drew laughter from everyone. Zagreb gave him the middle finger and chuckled. "Volkov, I can pull out that thing of yours, spin it 3 times around your waist, and I'll have a dog whip in my hand. You believe me? Keep it down, keep it down. Don't show off my special skills." Volkov nudged the man next to him, who looked to be almost 40, with his elbow, and grinned mischievously. "You're going to scare a young seeker, Victor. He's a greenhorn. He doesn't know anything." Victor Crumb, though he looked the most mature of the 7 players, was actually the youngest, just turned 17. However, Crumb ignored his teammates' joke, instead frowning and staring at the sky, deep wrinkles forming on his forehead. "Victor, what are you looking at?" Zagreb asked. "Someone's flying in the sky," Crumb said. Everyone looked up in surprise, following the direction Crumb was pointing, and indeed saw a figure gliding towards the stands. They were first stunned, then erupted in an uproar. Volkov exclaimed in amazement, "To fly in the sky without a broomstick? Who is that person?" Crumb, with the best eyesight, stared intently at the figure and said in a deep voice, "Ralph Scamander." Everyone else was familiar with the name. Not to mention that Scamander had received 2 Order of Merlin medals and saved the floating dragon ship. Just the fact that he had been in England for at least 20 days in the past month meant that no one would not know him. "What is Scamander going to do?" Volkov asked. "Is this also part of the Irish show?" Just then, a vibration came from behind. Zagreb immediately turned around and exclaimed excitedly, "It's coming, the Vila performance, my favorite high-energy show." The other players all turned around and looked into the depths of the players' tunnel, revealing smiles that only men could understand. Bulgaria's mascots are the beautiful Vila. Just by walking by in groups, they can make one's blood boil and fill one with inexhaustible energy. As members of the Bulgarian national team, seeing the Vevis up close was a unique perk for them. Zagreb even numbered the Vevis, calling the most beautiful one number 8, matching his jersey number. If Bulgaria won the championship, he planned to muster the courage to confess his love to number 8. Zagreb's face showed a look of longing, but that expression quickly vanished, replaced by a blank stare. The Vevis he so desperately wanted didn't appear. Instead, a gigantic monster emerged from the passage. The monster had a woman's head, but its face was wrinkled and ugly like an old woman, its hair stiff like a hedgehog's quills. Where arms should have grown, there were dragon-like wings. It also had the body of a vulture and bronze-colored claws, trailing a curled scorpion tail behind it. Everyone recognized it as the Greek mascot, the harpy. The harpy let out a piercing shriek, and several Quidditch players retreated in terror. Only Zagreb remained standing, staring blankly at the harpy. "Run!" Crumb shouted. Zagreb belatedly tried to escape, but the harpy had already pounced, its bronze claws gripping his head. With a mere flick of the claws, it crushed Zagreb's skull, the scene resembling a watermelon smashing to the ground, its flesh scattering everywhere, blood staining the player's tunnel. Beater Volkov screamed in terror, while Chaser Ivanova and Dimitrov both fell to the ground in fright. Crumb, pale and trembling, pulled out his wand and shouted, "Stun!" The stun spell struck the harpy, but bounced off and hit Volkov in the head, who collapsed to the ground, unconscious. The harpy raised its head, its eyes fixed on Crumb with a crazed glare, then charged at him. Crumb's face turned deathly pale, his expression one of panic. Afraid his head would explode, he immediately shifted his position, ducking towards the ground. The talons missed Crumb's head, but still grazed his arm and pierced his ribs. Crumb was in excruciating pain, unable to open his eyes, almost losing consciousness. The harpy ignored the wizard impaled in its talons, instead walking out of the player's tunnel and looking up at the sky. Her powerful dynamic vision quickly spotted the flying figure, and she spread her wings, soaring towards the stadium at unimaginable speed. The spectators, anxiously waiting for the villa, witnessed this horrifying scene. The enormous harpy, like a hunting eagle, moved with incredible speed, its talons slashing towards Scamander in midair. Chapter 528. Go quickly and invite Dumbledore. A gigantic harpy suddenly appeared, swooping down on the boy in midair, eliciting a deafening roar and screams from the stands. Rolf, sensing the danger, charged forward again, nearly doubling his speed, and abruptly pulled his feet back to narrowly evade the fierce attack. The boy's feet landed squarely on the harpy's head. The scene was like a galloping horse. Rolf lightly tapped his toes, using the momentum to propel himself upwards, landing gracefully in the corridor. He turned around, only to suddenly feel a dark shadow descending upon him. Rolf knew the harpy was fast, but he hadn't expected it to be this fast. He could only watch as silver-gray scales appeared all over his body. The harpy's greatest pride was its speed and flight and the sharpness of its claws. She extended her bronze talons, striking Rolf with lightning speed. She seemed to already see her sharp claws tearing out a boy's intestines. But the harpy was quickly stunned. Its claws, capable of easily tearing through thick steel plates, not only failed to pierce Rolf's skin but also sparked a blinding burst of sparks. A blue-white arc of electricity erupted between Rolf's hands, illuminating the boy's face. The arc instantly grew as thick as an arm, traveling along the harpy's claws and corroding her body, numbing her and causing a burning pain, as if she were being scorched. The harpy let out a painful, shrill cry, then flapped its wings, slamming into Rolf's chest. Like a hammer striking a bell, he was sent flying, his feet leaving the ground, crashing heavily into the compartment. The harpy's strength was immense. After Rolf knocked over several people, his speed remained undiminished, smashing through the partition of one compartment and slamming into another. The wizards in the other compartment stared at the scene in shock. With that kind of impact, a normal person should be dead, right? Lucius Malfoy, seated in his chair, had a sinister yet ecstatic look in his eyes, almost ready to stand up and loudly congratulate Scamander on his death. Sirius and Lupin, however, remained calm. They knew Rolf possessed a spell that made his body as hard as dragon scales, so the attack wouldn't do him much harm. The Bulgarian Minister of Magic, seemingly seeing something unbelievable, stood up in horror, shouting, but few in the box could understand him. He resorted to English, yelling, "Ludo Bagman, that's Crumb, this isn't Quidditch, you British are committing murder." Everyone looked in the direction the man was pointing and gasped. A man, covered in blood and seemingly in critical condition, was impaled in one of the harpy's claws. Ron immediately recognized him, exclaiming, "It's Crumb, is he dead?" Ginny asked, standing on tiptoe, peering intently. "Mr. Abalansk, you speak English, Ludo?" the guide asked with a look of surprise. This guy had pretended not to speak English, making Ludo babble in sign language all night. It turned out he was lying. "Is this the time to discuss this?" The Bulgarian Minister of Magic was nearly frantic. He roared, "Hurry up and save him. Crumb is going to be killed." Ludo also shouted save him, but didn't step forward to help. After all, even someone like Ralph was no match for him, who dared to step in. But some fearless wizards quickly grabbed their wands and rushed out. He wanted to earn the Order of Merlin's medal, he wanted to be a hero. But less than 10 seconds later, the man's head, spurting blood and brains, flew across the corridor and landed in the box. Many wizards screamed, almost paralyzed as they fell to the ground. Some cried out in terror. Ron immediately knelt down, vomiting up bacon, bread, apple cake, and the 2 eggs fried with onions and pepper. This was his dinner from not long ago. The harpy roared and charged into the box, but Sirius and Lupin raised their wands high. The spell struck the harpy, causing her to wince in pain and retreat, though she remained lingering outside the box. Sirius wanted to chase after her, but Lupin stopped him, his face grave. "Don't chase her, let's get these children out of here first." Sirius glanced at the dark mark in the sky and nodded seriously. "Harry, You must stay close to me." The rest of the audience had also lost interest in Crimm's fate. They scrambled among themselves, trying to escape the box in the most convenient way possible. However, when they reached the first floor, they discovered a group of Haitian mascots, the Inferi, running rampage. Several mountain trolls from Liechtenstein had also gone berserk, knocking over countless people. A chaotic battle erupted inside the stadium. Spectators trampled and scrambled, rushing desperately towards the doors. Some cried, some staggered, some vomited, their pale faces filled with terror. Fudge, witnessing the scene, collapsed to the ground, dizzy and filled with intense terror. To prevent unlicensed spectators from sneaking into the stadium, and to prevent spectators from disrupting the match, anti-apparition transformation charms had been installed near the arena. But now, they were becoming a hindrance. Seeing Fudge sitting on the ground in agony, Dexter and Umbridge had to each grab one of his arms and drag him towards the door. Fudge cried out, "Quick, quick, go get Dumbledore." Sherry, carrying a black leather suitcase, rushed into the box against a fleeing crowd. Seeing Rolf sitting on a chair covered in dust, his clothes tattered, the girl ran over, her face full of concern. "Rolf, are you alright?" Rolf shook his head and asked, "Why are you here?" Sherry breathed a sigh of relief, reached out to brush the dust off the boy, and said, "I saw you get knocked away by the harpy, and I was afraid something had happened to you, so I came to check on you, and to bring you the box. I'm fine." Rolf took the girl's hand and said softly, "Where are Grandpa and Grandma?" Grandpa, Grandma, and Professor McGonagall went to the first floor. "There are quite a few magical creatures there too," Sherry said. "Marjorie and Hermione are maintaining order, trying to prevent a stampede." Ralph nodded, then said seriously, "Shirley, you go back immediately and take Marjorie and Hermione away from here. Remember," he instructed, "don't take the stairs, Death Eaters might be mixed in. Just ride the dragon and fly them out through the air." "They're yours." Shirley nodded vigorously, looking at the boy and asking, "What about you?" Ralph stood up, hugged the girl with the ponytail, gently kissed her forehead, and smiled, "I'm going to kill that harpy." Chapter 529 Lone Egg Herocrum. Inside the Quidditch Stadium, wizards fled in terror, jostling and pushing their way down the corridors. A little girl was knocked to the ground, her mother screamed, trying to pull her daughter up, but the throng carried her forward. No one cared for the girl's safety, they trampled over her as she cried out in anguish. With a loud bang, the stairs and corridors shook violently, nearly throwing the wizards off their feet. They tumbled to the ground, their faces filled with despair as they looked up. The harpy swooped down, its massive form obscured by the narrow windows, but it tore through the walls with its sharp claws, bursting inside. Broken stones rained down, crashing down on their heads. A wizard raised his wand at the banshee, but before he could cast the spell, the long, thin scorpion tail pierced his chest like a spear. The man died instantly. With a flick of the tail, his body flew away, quickly crashing back into the crowd, blood spurting like warm rain onto their faces. After a few seconds of shock, screams erupted as they scrambled to their feet and scattered in panic. Some even jumped from the stairs and windows. Fortunately, magic cushioned their fall, so they only landed face first, then, ignoring the dust, continued screaming and running for their lives. In the blink of an eye, a large area was cleared beside the trampled girl. The harpy swooped down, its sharp claws aimed at the child. Many wizards noticed this scene, some were horrified, others felt a pang of sympathy, but no one dared to intervene. The child's mother frantically pushed against the flow of people, screaming at the top of her lungs, "No!" In the nick of time, a massive steel frame hurtled towards them from afar, moving with such speed that it created a whooshing, thunderous sound. The harpy immediately abandoned the girl, quickly shifting several steps to the side in an attempt to dodge the frame's attack. But the meter-thick steel frame split in two mid-air, then into 4, then 8. These transformed into iron rods, like a dense barrage of arrows, blocking the harpy's path. Even as she attempted to dodge, her weakest point, her wings, was pierced by 2 of the thunderous iron rods. Everyone looked up and witnessed a scene they would never forget. The immense force of the iron rods sent the harpy flying backward, pinning her to the wall, the ends of the rods still trembling violently. The crowd's faces paled with fear as they quickly spotted a figure running towards them along the stadium wall. Rolf moved with effortless grace, reaching the girl in the blink of an eye. He picked her up and examined her. The girl, still shaken, recognized the boy who had grabbed her and clung tightly to his neck. bursting into tears. The girl's mother finally stumbled out of the crowd, rushed over, and hugged her child tightly, then tearfully thanked Ralph for saving her life. "You should leave here quickly," Ralph said, walking towards the harpy. The iron rod pierced the harpy's wing. The excruciating pain drove her mad, her screams like clashing metal, causing the wizard's ears to ring. Ralph moved forward unhurriedly, gently raising his arm, a brilliant bolt of lightning appearing in his hand. An arc of electricity suddenly extended along the boy's arm, a blue-white beam piercing the air and striking the harpy. The electric shock caused her to howl in agony. Ralph walked to the wall, looked up at the harpy pinned to it, and a fairy sword appeared in his hand. At that moment, the commotion and shouts ceased, the surrounding sounds fell silent, and every eye was fixed on the boy, as if the whole world had held its breath. Ralph leaped high, piercing the harpy's throat with his sword. She arched her back, howling in agony, her tail lashing out. A pool of red blood spread out beneath her. Those who witnessed this erupted in a deafening cheer, spreading to every corner of the stadium. Crumb, who had been thrown to the ground, was awakened by the shouts. He groggily opened his eyes and saw a blond boy pulling a long sword from the harpy's neck. Blood gushed out. Half dead, Crumb's eyes widened for a moment, then everything went black, and he fainted again. Without the harpy's attack, the spectators on the upper floors of the stadium were no longer in a hurry to run down. The upper floors were safer, while the first floor was filled with iniquities, trolls, and other magical creatures wreaking havoc. Ralph didn't rush down either. He continued on his way, staying behind to treat many injured wizards. As a veterinarian, the harpy hadn't injured many wizards, most had been injured by falling and being trampled while fleeing the stairs. Ralph even found Crumb in the crowd. He wasn't dead yet, but had lost too much blood. Any later and he would probably be dead. The harpy's claws had pierced Crumb's groin, almost turning him into a lone egg, thankfully. When Ralph reached the first floor, it was a scene of chaos, with many corpses lying on the ground. A troll charged, swinging its massive club at the boy, who floated up, simultaneously waving his wand. The giant rock was summoned and, under the effect of the levitation spell, slammed into the troll's head, causing it to crash to the ground. Tina, hearing the commotion, turned and saw Ralph, her face lighting up with joy. She quickly frowned again and called out, "Ralph, where are Margaret and Sherry? Aren't they with you, Grandma? I had Sherry ride the fire dragon and take them away first." "They should still be in the sky," Ralph said. The boy strode forward and saw Newt, Tina, and Professor McGonagall fighting a group of infernals. He said, "I'll help you, no need, Ralph, we'll handle this." "Don't worry," Nit said, pointing to the dark mark in the sky. His face was serious. "This is definitely a Death Eater plot. I'm worried about leaving them out alone. Go find Margaret and Sherry." "Understood." Ralph stood up and flew straight into the sky. As he passed the green skull, he raised his wand, aimed it at the dark mark, and said, "Vanishing." The skull formed of smoke instantly turned into a wisp of smoke and disappeared into the vast night. Chapter 530 The Death Eater's Ambush. Above, a colossal Norwegian ridgeback glided slowly among the clouds, its wings flapping. Shirley sat cross-legged on Norbert's back, a black leather suitcase resting on her lap. A strange creature, half-lizard, half-dwarf, perched atop the suitcase. It tiptoed close to Shirley's ear, whispering incoherently, then its expression became one of fawning anticipation. The girl with the ponytail nodded slightly and quickly retrieved a small bottle from the suitcase. The magical creature immediately seized the bottle with its large, chain-like red claws, excitedly sucking at the crimson liquid inside. Margaret lay nearby, her hands folded behind her head, quietly gazing at the bright moonlight. Hermione, meanwhile, rode on the dragon's slender neck, holding a panoramic telescope and looking down. This was the telescope she had bought to watch the game, but it was clearly useless tonight. She could only use it to observe the scene inside the stadium. The three girls each had their own things to do, but Professor Trelawney sat there, pale-faced, her face scrunched up, looking pitiful as if she wanted to speak but dared not. Trelawney had a fear of heights, and now, sitting 1,000 meters in the air without any safety railings, her legs were trembling. She was terrified that the fire dragon would suddenly flip over and she would fall straight down, turning into a pile of minced meat. She should have known better than to run away with these people and instead squeeze onto the stairs with the other audience members. Well, even then, she might have been trampled into mincemeat. Trelawney could only pray silently, "Great-great-grandmother, Please watch over me from heaven. When I return alive, I'll burn you a few illustrated copies of Merlin and Arthur's erotic history." Seeing Professor Trelawney trembling, Shirley looked up and softly comforted her. "Professor Trelawney, it's safe here, don't worry. I'm not worried. I already divined. I'll live to be 200 years old. Tonight will definitely be alright." Trelawney tried to speak in her usual ethereal voice, but fear made her voice tremble, ruining its mystical effect. Hermione, not far away, heard Trelawney's words and gave a soft snort of disdain. "Then you must have also divined tonight's disaster, didn't you, Professor Trelawney?" Professor Trelawney looked at Hermione, her gaze as if she were looking at the detestable McGonagall. "Of course I divined it, Miss Granger. But I don't want to flaunt my omniscience. I often act as if I don't have a third eye, so that others won't feel uneasy." "Then why didn't you warn everyone?" Hermione said. "And just watch the disaster happen." Trelawney was speechless for a moment. She pretended not to hear and turned to Sherry, whom she liked quite a bit, saying, "Miss Swinton, I was just observing you and found that you have a very strong vision, which means that you possess all the qualities required for the noble art of divination, unlike some poor, vulgar person. Why didn't you choose my class?" Hermione puffed out her cheeks angrily. She was about to retort when she saw something through the telescope and exclaimed, "The dark mark is gone." Everyone looked down towards the gymnasium. The terrifying green skull was indeed gone. "Can we go back now?" Trelawney asked again in a trembling voice. "No," Shirley shook her head. "Rolf told us to wait for him here. He'll come pick us up once the stadium is safe." "But this is a fire dragon," Trelawney gasped. Seeing the three girls so calm, she sighed heavily. These days, students are really something, keeping fire dragons as pets. They waited a while longer, then Norbert suddenly roared, his voice deafening. Trelawney asked fearfully, "What's wrong? Is this fire dragon hungry?" Shirley stood up and smiled. "Rolf's here." Not long after she finished speaking, a figure suddenly flew over and landed steadily on Norbert's back. Seeing Rolf covered in blood, Shirley quickly came over, gently tugging at his sleeve, and asked with concern, "Are you injured?" Rolf replied casually, "It's not my blood, it's the harpy's blood. She killed a lot of wizards, so I had to kill her." "That's strange. When we went last time, the harpy wasn't this bad-tempered, was she?" Shirley asked, puzzled. "It means another wizard drugged it and secretly switched it with Avila." Rolf shrugged. "Death Eaters," Hermione exclaimed. "It must be them." Rolf nodded, and seeing Shirley holding the half-lizard, half-dwarf animal, he frowned and said, "How did the sheep-eater get out? Didn't you feed it the blood of the killer who attacked you before?" Shirley said, "It just sensed that person." Rolf narrowed his eyes. "She's nearby." "Yes," Shirley nodded. "Should we chase after her?" Rolf was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Chase her." Under the protection of Sirius, Lupin, and Arthur, the group finally rushed out of the gymnasium and headed towards the camp along a path. Harry looked back at the gymnasium, still shaken, and suddenly shouted, "The skull symbol is gone." Everyone stopped and turned to look at the gymnasium. "Can anyone explain what that skull was?" Ron said impatiently. "It didn't hurt anyone. Why are you all so scared?" "That's the symbol of the Dark Lord, Ron," said Mr. Weasley. "It's been 13 years since we've seen it, so naturally everyone's nervous. It's like seeing the Dark Lord again." "I don't understand," Ron said, frowning. "I mean, after all, it's just a shadow in the air, Ron. The Dark Lord and the Death Eaters release the dark mark in the air every time they kill someone." Lupin sighed. "The fear it brings, you don't know, you're too young. Imagine you come home and find the dark mark hovering above your house. You know what you'd see if you went inside." Mr. Weasley shuddered. "It's everyone's greatest fear, the greatest fear, but what are the Death Eaters trying to do? Releasing the dark mark during the Quidditch World Cup final. What's the point?" Harry asked, puzzled. "The point," Mr. Weasley chuckled dryly. "Harry, maybe for amusement, maybe to remind us that they have many more out there enjoying themselves, maybe, to kill you all." A voice echoed from the nearby woods, followed by a flash of bright green light that illuminated everything around. Avada Kedavra. Chapter 531 Dragon Breath. As the green light flashed, Sirius Black, as if by reflex, lunged at Harry, pinning him to the ground and shielding him beneath him. However, the sudden Avada Kedavra spell missed everyone, veering sharply upwards. Other spells followed closely behind, streaks of burning light interacting in midair, forming a chaotic net of flames. Percy, caught off guard, was struck by the crucifixion curse, collapsing to the ground in agony, writhing and screaming. Ron, equally bewildered, was about to ask, "Where are the Death Eaters?" when suddenly he was thrown backwards. He was struck by two more red lights in midair, his face swelling instantly as if slapped, before crashing heavily to the ground. Well, he now knew where the Death Eaters were. Seeing a spell coming, George swiftly shoved Fred aside, who did the same, both falling to the ground on their feet. Arthur shielded his daughter Ginny, making her lie on the ground. Lupin and Charlie, having spent years in the Dragon Sanctuary and experienced various emergencies, were the most experienced in combat and had already coordinated their counterattack. In the dense forest, the man who used the killing curse glared at the person beside him and said, "What are you doing?" If the other hadn't suddenly raised his arm, causing his wand to deflect upwards, he would have already killed Arthur Weasley. "What are you doing, Lucius Malfoy?" The man deliberately lowered his voice, speaking in a threatening tone. "Didn't I tell you? You can't kill Harry Potter." "I attacked Arthur Weasley. They're so close. What if you missed?" The wizard in the black hood glared angrily. "Whoever kills Harry Potter must die." Malfoy was speechless. According to this rule, even slightly powerful dark magic couldn't be used, since there was a possibility of accidentally killing Potter. But this was an ambush, a life-or-death ambush right under the Ministry of Magic's nose, not some Hogwarts game. Instead of taking advantage of the Auror's distraction by the stadium mascots, we'd quickly eliminate the enemy, hold back on our own people, and treat the enemy with kindness. Are we just ruthless Death Eaters, or Damorers? But Malfoy couldn't disobey. He could only raise his wand and shout menacingly, "Strangle," but he had already missed the best opportunity to attack. Arthur Weasley had already cast a powerful armor spell in front of him. A series of dazzling flashes flickered in the air. Harry, lying on the ground, could still feel his hair swaying. He looked at Ron lying on the ground not far away and shouted, "Ron, are you alright?" The only response to Harry was Ron's painful howl, his head swollen like a pig's. Harry felt a surge of anger rush to his head. He stood up, intending to attack the Death Eaters, but as soon as he raised his head slightly, he felt a dull, knife-like shockwave glide across his face. Several bloody gashes instantly appeared on Harry's cheek. Sirius Black immediately pulled Harry down. The shield in front of them quickly burst into flames under the magical attack. While extinguishing the fire, he anxiously instructed, "Harry, stay behind me, don't show your face." But, no buts. Sirius Black brandished his wand like a sword, sparks flying from the tip. His face contorted with rage, he said, "There's a group of Death Eaters on the other side. You're no match for them. I can't keep protecting you, Sirius, this won't do." "There are too many Death Eaters," Lupin shouted. "We can't hold out much longer." Sirius Black knew this all too well. Although there were only 6 Death Eaters, fewer in number than them, only Remus, Arthur, and Charlie were capable of fighting on their side. Including himself, there were only 4 of them. At a different time and place, 4 against 6, while not necessarily killing each other, would certainly be enough for self-preservation. But now, Percy was under the crucifixion curse, and Harry, Ginny, Ron, and the others were all children, not only not an asset, but also a burden, requiring considerable effort to protect. Their location was even worse, practically flat ground with no decent cover, while the Death Eaters were hiding in the dense forest, concealed by trees. It was clear this wasn't a close fight, but a meticulously planned ambush. George and Fred whispered amongst themselves, quickly pulling several large dung balls from their pockets and tossing them into the forest. Before they even hit the ground, they exploded in midair under the barrage of spells. A pungent odor quickly filled the forest. They then threw smoke bombs, large plumes of white smoke hissing and enveloping them. In an instant, the number of incoming spells decreased drastically, and their accuracy also suffered due to the smoke bombs. The pressure on the group eased instantly. Sirius Black breathed a sigh of relief and praised, "Well done, you two." Arthur Weasley seized the opportunity to rush over to the groaning Percy and check on him. Harry also hurried to Ron's side and gasped. Ron's appearance was a horrific sight. His face was badly swollen and bruised, his eyes were squinting, seemingly unable to open fully, his lips were cracked, and there was blood at the corners of his mouth and nose. He was unrecognizable even to his own mother. Seeing Ron suddenly tremble violently and mumble, Harry thought he was about to say his last words, so his lips trembled and he choked out, "Ron, what do you want to say?" "I'll do anything to help you," but even when Harry leaned in close, he couldn't understand a word Ron was saying. He looked to Ginny for help and asked, What is he saying? Ron probably wants to say. Ginny pointed to Harry's foot and said, "You stepped on his finger." Harry quickly moved his foot, and together with Ginny, they grabbed Ron's arm and dragged him to Sirius's side. A sudden gust of wind picked up, slowly dispersing the fog. George tossed a few more smoke bombs and urged, "Shall we apple right away now?" "Yes," Fred said, "we don't have many smoke bombs left, and this fog won't hold up for long." "No way," Charlie said with a wry smile, "I just tried. There's an anti-apparition charm around here." "Then what do we do?" Harry asked. "Are we just going to wait here to die?" "We can only hold out while waiting for the Aurors to come to our aid," Lupin sighed. "But there are magical creatures attacking the spectators in the stadium. They won't be able to cover this area anytime soon," Mr. Weasley said. Everyone fell silent. Ginny suddenly said, "If Ralph were here, that would be great." The silence deepened. Harry, Ron, and the twins thought that Ralph was powerful, and having him around would certainly make it easier to break through and leave. But Charlie and Lupin knew a deeper meaning. The black trunk in the boy's hand contained a vast number of magical creatures, even a dragon. With Ralph here, let alone 6 Death Eaters, even twice as many could be easily wiped out. Scamander, he's an army in himself. That's no exaggeration. A strong wind blew, completely dispersing the smoke. 6 Death Eaters stood in the woods, their eyes gleaming through the gaps in their hoods. One's aimed at them. "Arthur Weasley, surrender now." Malfoy deliberately altered his voice, arrogantly saying, "You don't want your son and daughter to die here, do you? Surrender your wand and you won't be killed. There's even a reward." Laughter erupted from all around, one woman's laughter not only the loudest but also the longest. "Remus and I will stay and cover you," Sirius said resolutely. "Arthur, you take them and retreat now." "I'll stay too, Sirius," Harry said. "Ha ha ha, you'll all die. None of you will escape tonight," a woman shouted. But she suddenly stopped, abruptly raising her head to look at the sky, her face instantly filled with disbelief. Everyone felt a shadow loom over the earth. They all looked up, their faces filled with horror. A Norwegian Spinosaurus, over 10 meters long, flapped its wings and hovered high in the air, its black, pearl-like eyes surveying the ground. A handsome blonde youth sat atop the dragon's head, like a supreme god looking down upon the mortal realm. Beside him knelt a girl with a long, thin ponytail, clutching a black box, seemingly speaking to him. Ralph smiled, reached out and patted Norbert's head, softly saying, "Dragon's breath." Chapter 532 Walton McNeil. As Ralph gave the command, the dragon Norbert hissed, exhaling wisps of white smoke from its mouth and nostrils. Then, swirling orange flames shot towards the ground. The dense canopy of the forest was instantly ignited by the dragonfire, billowing black smoke into the dark night sky. Harry, Ron, and Mr. Weasley stared blankly at the sky. When they read the Daily Prophet, it said that Ralph had saved the floating dragon ship using a dragon. They had been skeptical, even discussing it at the dinner table, thinking that current news was all sensationalism and irresponsible. But now they realized how wrong they had been. Ralph really did have a dragon. Ginny also stared blankly at the sky. She had only mentioned it casually, never expecting Ralph to actually come, riding such a huge dragon. She murmured, "It's really huge." Sirius couldn't help but smile wryly. He had been exaggerating Ralph's abilities, but he had seriously underestimated him. But what respectable little wizard could keep a dragon? Charlie and Lupin breathed a long sigh of relief. Ralph's arrival meant they were saved. As for the dragon, they'd seen Norbert in Romania, so they weren't surprised. Charlie even waved to Norbert. The 6 Death Eaters also gazed up at the soaring dragon. They exchanged glances, all simultaneously concluding that their ambush was doomed. But they were unwilling to give up so easily. After all, they'd prepared for this ambush for a month, so close to success, yet at the last moment, all their efforts were in vain. How could they give up? Especially that witch, she had to take Potter away. Just as they were caught in a dilemma, flames began to dance through the branches, rising and falling, quickly turning the surroundings into a sea of fire. Black smoke rose, churning and twisting. As the wind shifted, they all blinked, tears streaming down their faces, rubbing their eyes. One of the Death Eaters couldn't hold back any longer and ran deeper into the forest, but was accidentally engulfed in flames. His hood, hair, and beard burst into flames, instantly transforming him into a blazing crown twice the height of his head. He screamed, help me, just as the other Death Eaters were about to rescue him, a burning log fell and struck him squarely on the head, killing him instantly. Another deafening crash followed as a tree, mostly consumed by flames, collapsed, burning branches raining down around it, bouncing off the ground and sending sparks and smoke flying. "Charge out, grab Harry Potter," the witch shouted. "Get him and get out of here." The witch charged ahead, and the others followed, emerging from the woods together. Lupin grinned, watching the Death Eaters flee the forest, raised his wand, and shouted, "Stun, Mr. Weasley and Sirius," snapping out of their daze, exchanged a glance and also raised their wands. Spells flew through the air again, but the tide had turned, the Death Eaters had been on the offensive. A chaotic battle ensued. Ralph patted Norbert's head, and it suddenly lunged forward, spewing bright, scorching flames towards the ground. Seeing the dragon's breath approaching again, the Death Eaters abandoned the fight and scattered. One of them, covered in flames, screamed and charged forward recklessly, while two others retreated back into the forest. Two Death Eaters remained. One was struck by a binding charm and stopped in place. The other, whether paralyzed by fear or simply slow to react, stood frozen in place. The flames instantly engulfed both of them. They burst into flames, stumbling and tumbling across the clearing, their burning hands raised high, fingers gleaming like torches. The stench of burning flesh overwhelmed any aroma, and their screams were drowned out by the crackling and hissing of the trees. Malfoy, retreating into the forest, watched this scene with terror. He knew that if he stayed any longer, that would be his fate. He had a son and a wife, he didn't want to become roast meat so soon. Fortunately, they hadn't set up an anti-apparition spell in the forest during their ambush, so they still had a chance to escape. Malfoy roared at the witch, "Get out of here," but the witch didn't move, her eyes fixed frantically on the sky, staring intently at the boy, as if trying to imprint him in her mind. She soon couldn't look any more, because the flames reached the witch's robes, and in an instant, the clothes burst into flames, making her appear as if she were wearing a fluttering orange silk robe, wisps of gray smoke rising from her body. Malfoy's wand sprayed water, trying to extinguish the witch's flames, but the surrounding temperature was too high. It was simply a drop in the ocean. Malfoy could already smell the burning flesh, so he grabbed her arm and parried it away. When Ralph returned to the ground with Sherry, Hermione, and the others, the small forest had been reduced to scorched earth, littered with blackened charcoal and glowing embers. Professor Trelawney's body went limp the moment her feet touched the ground. She vowed she would never leave Hogwarts during summer vacation again. It was far too dangerous outside. Seeing Ralph approach, everyone looked at him with awe. "Charlie, go check the forest and see if you can find any bodies," Ralph said. Charlie nodded and walked towards the scorched earth, Harry and Ginny following behind. "Ralph, we've caught a Death Eater here," Sirius shouted. "You'll never guess who he is." Ralph strode over and looked at the Death Eater who was now under Sirius's control. The man was in terrible condition, half his body was burned, his face was covered in an orange-red shadow, fluid oozed from his cracked red skin, and terrifying, congested blisters, as large as cockroaches, covered his skin. Ralph stared at the man's severely burned face for a long time before raising an eyebrow and saying, "Isn't this Mr. Walton McNeil, the chief executioner of the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Animals? I've been looking for you for ages." "It's me," the man pleaded weakly. "Please take me to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Arts." "No rush," the boy smiled. "Let me ask you a question first. Did you add hyena tree leaves to the food for those mascots?" McNeil nodded. "Yes, it was me." "Good that it was you." Ralph narrowed his eyes and asked again, "I also want to know, who were the Death Eaters who came with you tonight?" If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 533: The Death Eater's Purpose. McNeil was in excruciating pain, almost fainting. He knew that burns of this severity would be life-threatening without treatment at St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Creatures. He didn't want to die, he wanted to continue his family business as an executioner, beheading magical creatures. So, faced with the boy's question, McNeil, driven by a strong will to survive, betrayed his team without hesitation or guilt. The wizards burned to death outside the woods were Dirk Anthony and L.A. Terry. They were both officers in the Werewolf Capture Project under the Office of the Beasts. Hearing these two familiar names, Ralph and Sirius exchanged a glance. Not long ago, Ralph had shown Sirius a list of members of the Department of Magical Creature Management and Control, asking him to identify who had been Death Eaters, and Sirius had pointed out these two. There was another wizard named Pagel, who was crushed to death in the woods. But I've never seen him before, and I don't know where he came from or what his identity was. You've never seen him before? Ralph raised an eyebrow. No, McNeil said bitterly, enduring the excruciating pain. The Dark Lord is always very secretive. We never knew the identities of all the Death Eaters, only he knew who we were. That's wise, isn't it, McNeil? Sirius sneered. It prevents people like you from betraying them all. McNeil didn't have the energy to argue with Sirius. He painfully closed his eyes, breathing rapidly. There's another witch in the group. I don't know her, I don't even know her name. She always hides herself under her hood, very mysterious. Hearing this, Ralph subconsciously narrowed his eyes. On the night of the Merlin Medal Award ceremony, he had been ambushed by a witch. During their fight, he obtained a few drops of her blood, which he fed to the sheep-eater. Whenever a witch dared to appear near the boy, the sheep-eater would detect her. Ralph had followed the sheep-eater's lead here, only to encounter the Death Eaters attacking Sirius and the others. So it seems that the witch must be a Death Eater, and one of the 6. It's just unexpected that she's so cautious, even McNeil hasn't seen her face. Where's the last one? Sirius pressed. There are 6 of you in total. Who is the last Death Eater? McNeil remained silent. Ralph looked at him, a cold smile playing on his lips. Since you're unwilling to talk, there's no need to go to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Arts. Just go straight to Azkaban and let the Dementors treat your burns. Their kisses are a miracle cure, they'll instantly relieve your pain. Hearing the boy's threat, McNeil's burned lip twitched. He sighed softly. Lucius Malfoy? I knew it, Mr. Weasley exclaimed excitedly, as if hearing his lover's name. He paced back and forth, whispering excitedly, although Malfoy deliberately changes his voice, I can recognize him just by his figure. Now we can finally bring him to Azkaban. McNeil, however, didn't think so. That guy was so cunning, and he donated so much gold to the Ministry of Magic every year. How could he be captured so easily? Of course, he only thought this to himself, he wasn't foolish enough to say it aloud. So, what exactly is your purpose? Lupin asked. I have access to the mascots. Malfoy had me feed them hyena tree leaves, McNeil answered honestly. Anthony and Terry are responsible for switching the mascots during the finals. Replacing them with magical creatures like Egyptian harpies and Haitian infernals. Those mascots have consumed hyena tree leaves, which will drive them into a frenzy, attacking wizards and disrupting the entire stadium. McNeil paused for a moment, then continued, the Aurors will be drawn away, and will take the opportunity to ambush them and capture. Harry Potter, what are you going to do with Harry? Sirius Black demanded sharply. I don't know either, McNeil shook his head. They only said we can't kill Potter, we have to capture him alive. I don't know the specific purpose. I was dragged here by Malfoy, I'm just an accomplice. Upon hearing this, Ralph also fell into deep thought. In the original timeline, Malfoy did indeed lead a group of Death Eaters to attack the camp in the middle of the night. But upon seeing the dark mark, they immediately fled. They weren't exactly cowards, but they certainly weren't as brave as they were tonight. And, the demand not to kill Harry sounds more like a special order from Voldemort. Could Voldemort be with Malfoy? But what was the Dark Lord's purpose in capturing Harry? If it was for resurrection, Voldemort had already tried once a few months ago in Little Hangleton's graveyard, and failed. He should have already sensed something amiss with old Tom Riddle's remains then. Without his father's bones, what use is Harry's blood? Ralph was completely baffled. Just then, Charlie returned, whispering, Ralph, we've checked, and only found 3 charred bodies, so the witch and Malfoy escaped, Sirius said. What do we do now? Mr. Weasley asked. Everyone's eyes turned to Ralph. Although he was the youngest, only 14, they had unknowingly come to regard him as their pillar of support. Send me to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Arts, McNeil gasped, his entire body racked with pain. Each breath brought a sharp pain to his chest. Ralph ignored McNeil and calmly said, give McNeil to Minister Fudge and say it's a gift from me. He'll be happy. Sirius and the others took McNeil to Fudge, but Ralph didn't go with them. He took Sherry, Marjorie, and Hermione back to the camp. Their safety was more important than joining in the fun. When they entered the tent, they found Newt, Tina, and Professor McGonagall already back, anxiously waiting for them in the living room. You're finally back, Tina said, clearly relieved. Why did it take you so long? The girls gathered around Tina and Professor McGonagall, chattering about what had just happened. Hearing that the Death Eaters had ambushed Harry and Sirius, they were all terrified. If Ralph hadn't arrived in time, they probably would have succeeded. Ralph sat down next to Newt and asked softly, Grandpa, how's it going at the gymnasium? Those magical creatures have been brought under control. Newt's voice was soft, rough with grief, but many wizards still died. What begins in blood will end in blood, Ralph said earnestly. We will avenge those innocent people who died unjustly. Tina sighed softly. Stop talking, don't talk about death anymore. You children, go upstairs and go to sleep, urged by Tina. Everyone got up and went to their rooms. Chapter 534 Fermentation. This night was destined to be sleepless. This was especially true for the nearly 100,000 wizards stranded in the camp. Although the chaos had completely subsided, how could anyone sleep peacefully after the magical creature attack, the scramble for survival, and the terrifying stampedes? Not to mention, many wizards were injured, some even losing loved ones, their grief making sleep even more difficult. But no matter how sleepless they were, one thing was certain, everyone wanted to leave this dangerous place as soon as possible. No one could guarantee there wouldn't be a second attack. The sooner they left, the safer they would be. As for the World Cup final, which hadn't even started yet, other matches might cost money, but this one was a matter of life and death. What was the point of watching? Some clever wizards had already packed up their tents overnight and rushed to the key distribution point to queue, even though it wasn't open yet, and there were no Ministry of Magic staff there. They figured they could just wait. The next day, many wizards got up early, confidently going to collect their key, only to find a queue stretching for kilometers in the camp. And at that time, the key distribution point wasn't even open yet. Rove woken up early and strolled around the camp. Seeing this scene, he was speechless, a reminder of his university course selection days in his previous life. Students couldn't access the campus network on their computers and had to use the library's computer labs. Many students went there in the middle of the night and slept outside the library. This was probably the scene before him. Fortunately, British wizards could apprehend and leave without waiting in line for keys, a stroke of luck amidst misfortune. The spectators were eager to leave the camp, and wizards from around the world who hadn't come to England for the final were anxiously awaiting the result. Ireland and Bulgaria hadn't touched the trophy in a long time. Whoever won would be a new king ascending the throne, making history. But they waited a long time, receiving not the result, but instead astonishing news, the disaster of the Quidditch World Cup. 13 years later, the Dark Mark reappears, shocking. Death Eaters blitz England, that man returns. All the wizarding newspapers in the world simultaneously reported on the horrific accident at the Quidditch World Cup. The newspapers even included photos of the Dark Mark hanging above the stadium. As time went on, more photos appeared, magical creatures going berserk and killing spectators, people crushing each other to death, trampling deaths, coupled with the distinctively British BBC somber tone. It was truly shocking. Wizards worldwide were in an uproar. They never imagined that such a highly anticipated World Cup could result in such a major accident. In fact, the Quidditch World Cup wasn't without its share of deaths. Rather, frequent accidents were a common phenomenon. The most typical example was the 1809 Russian World Cup. That year's final was between Romania and New Spain. Romanian batsman Nico Nenad, in order to secure victory, bribed a local dark wizard beforehand to cast a curse on the forest on the edge of the Siberian plain. During the match, as Romania fell behind, Nenad deliberately hit the runner off the field, into the enchanted forest. All the trees seemed to come alive, marching towards the pitch, trampling everything in their path and causing hundreds of injuries and deaths. But that happened over 200 years ago. In the last 2 centuries, the death toll at the World Cup has decreased, and most of the deaths have been among players. An incident of this magnitude, like the British Quidditch World Cup, is truly horrific. The most furious country was Bulgaria. 2 of their Quidditch national team players died, and while Krum survived, he was seriously injured and had to recover at St. Mungo's Hospital for Magic for some time. Bulgarian Magic Minister Obaransko held a press conference afterward, angrily denouncing Fudge and claiming that the attack was a conspiracy by the Irish team to win. The Irish team was also innocently dragged into the mess. They did nothing wrong, and even suffered injuries to several players, yet they were unjustly labeled as both the Irish martial arts team and the murder team. Rita, a veteran journalist and industry benchmark, also wrote a lengthy article about the incident. Naturally, she criticized the Ministry of Magic for its inadequate security, the Auror's panic, lax security, dark wizards escaping justice, bringing shame to the nation. Rita's biggest criticism, however, was directed at Minister Fudge himself, especially his phrases, "No comment and you reporters run faster than the golden snitch." Rita also expressed serious doubt more about the ministry's reported death toll of 29. After all, just a glance at the newspaper photos revealed far more than 29 corpses. Their death toll was more like watered-down water. Fudge hadn't actually manipulated the data, he had simply played a word game. He hadn't published a total death toll, but rather the number of wizards killed by magical creatures. The number of wizards actually killed by magical creatures was relatively small, most were trampled to death. In a stadium with a capacity of 100,000, in such a confined space, if someone fell, those following would quickly collapse in succession, like a human pyramid, layer upon layer, until the wizard at the bottom would be crushed to death. But the true death toll couldn't be released, the number was too high. If it were Fudge, the Minister of Magic, would either have to resign or apologize to the entire nation. The only good news was that the killer had been caught, though not by the Ministry of Magic, but at least someone was in charge. Fudge immediately held a press conference, bringing out the severely burned McNeil and the 3 charred corpses. He shifted all the blame onto the Death Eaters and demanded that the Prophets Daily publish fewer photos of the dead. His reason, of course, was to respect the privacy of the deceased and avoid causing further harm to their families. He also demanded that the newspaper focus its reporting on good deeds. For example, Ralph killing the harpy and saving a little girl, or his saving Crumb, demonstrating the great friendship between the two countries. What? The public has the right to know. No, they only have the right to be ignorant. Fudge also repeatedly invited Ralph, the one who caught the killer, to attend press conferences. Given Rove's current fame, if he could attend the press conference and say a few kind words, Fudge's pressure would be greatly reduced. However, Rove directly declined, stating he was unavailable. The boy was indeed unavailable, as summer vacation was ending in just a few days. Thanks to the generous donors I Love a Shiba Inu, Rainbow Cat and Blue Rabbit, The Return of the Warrior, and Endureless Shepherd for their donations. Chapter 535 Rov, I Want to See Your Big Dragon. On September 1st, Hogwarts finally began its new school year. Unlike previous years, many burly men in black appeared outside Platform 9. They were imposing, with stern expressions, and even behind sunglasses, their eyes radiated a murderous aura. Even the usually arrogant Muggle guards dared not approach. "They're all Aurors," Tonks, standing outside the platform checking luggage, whispered. Minister Fudge specifically sent them to protect the students to prevent further attacks by Death Eaters. Pretty good disguise, huh? Pretty good disguise indeed. Ralph glanced at the menacing-looking men in black and chuckled. If you hadn't told me, I would have thought they were the Mafia, here to rob the train station. What's the Mafia? Tonks asked with interest. That sounds pretty cool. Ralph thought for a moment and explained in layman's terms. You can think of them as Muggle Death Eaters. Realizing the Mafia wasn't a flattering term, Tonks rolled his eyes at the boy, raised his fist, and waved it, saying, if you keep making up these kinds of comparisons, I'll arrest you, then hurry up and arrest them. Ralph pointed to the group of reporters with cameras not far away and chuckled, if you arrest them here, the Daily Prophet will be on the news over there. Shocking. Female Auror violently arrests innocent student. No way, Tonks said with a confident grin. Those reporters were invited by Minister Fudge. They're not Rita Skeeter. They wouldn't dare touch on such taboo topics. Standing next to Ralph, Sherry asked curiously, what are they here for? To take pictures and write news. Tonks winked and said, read the newspapers tomorrow. There'll definitely be reports about the most beautiful Auror, the most beautiful scenery, or praising the Ministry of Magic for ensuring a smooth start to the new school year for young wizards. Fudge knew how to put on a show. But that was understandable. After the disastrous Quidditch World Cup, Fudge's approval rating had plummeted to an all-time low. And on the black market, the odds of Fudge continuing as minister next year were soaring. If he didn't improve his public image, he might really be out of a job next year. Seeing Twinks about to open his suitcase to check for prohibited items, Ralph joked, first of all, as a Merlin Medal recipient, I certainly wouldn't bring any prohibited items. Just based on our relationship, do I even need to have my luggage checked? No way, your suitcase is under close surveillance by the Auror office, Tonks said, But his eyes darted around, glancing at the surroundings, and he lowered his voice. "But if you promise me one thing, I won't check it." "What is it?" "The other day when I went to the Wheeleyes house, Ginny mentioned the Quidditch World Cup final night, and she said you have a dragon, a big, fierce dragon." Tonks excitedly grabbed Ralph's arm, his face full of anticipation. "Let me see it, and then let me sit on it and see what it's like." "I've never ridden a dragon before." In the end, Tonks didn't see Ralph's dragon, not because he didn't want to, but because there were too many people around, and it wasn't suitable for him to come out. After saying goodbye to Tonks, Ralph and Sherry passed through the wall and arrived at platform 9. A bright red Hogwarts Express train pulled up on the platform, billowing thick smoke. Many students and parents stood beside the train, bidding their final farewells. Ralph's arrival seemed to silence the moment. The previously bustling platform fell silent instantly. Everyone stared at him openly, as if he were a rare animal. There was no way around it. Ralph had caused such a stir this summer that everyone who saw him couldn't help but focus their attention on him. Many wanted to get Ralph's autograph, but because of the Aurors, no one dared to approach rashly. They feared that if they were too excited, the Aurors would mistake them for Death Eaters who had attacked the infamous Scamander, and then casually kill them. Who could they complain to then? Shirley walked side by side with Ralph, secretly glancing at the boy out of the corner of her eye, a secret sense of pride welling up inside her. How come my eye for talent is so good?" The girl with the ponytail smiled, her eyes crinkling, a slight upturn at the corners of her mouth that quickly vanished, almost imperceptible. As they approached the train door, they encountered the Wheeleyes, who had come to see them off. They exchanged greetings, and Mr. Weasley suddenly spoke. "Ralph, I have something to tell you." "Yes, Sherry, you go ahead," Ralph said. "See which carriage Hermione and the others are in." The girl with the ponytail gave a soft hum, took the suitcase from Ralph, politely said goodbye to the Wheeleyes, and then headed towards the train. Mrs. Weasley looked at Sherry and couldn't help but sigh, wishing she had such a gentle, quiet, and well-behaved daughter. Mr. Weasley led Ralph to a corner of the platform. After a moment of silence, he sighed. Lucius Malfoy was declared innocent by the Ministry of Magic yesterday. This was the first time Ralph had heard this news, but he had expected it and wasn't overly emotional. Yes, McNeil did identify Malfoy as the mastermind behind the Quidditch World Cup attack, but Malfoy had an alibi. On the night of the attack, Malfoy was with Fudge, and there were even over a dozen Aurors corroborating his story. Therefore, McNeil's identification wasn't enough to convict Malfoy. That day, after Malfoy was released, he even came to my office, Mr. Weasley said, his face grim. "It was just the two of us. Malfoy admitted to participating in the attack that night, but regretted not killing me. He even threatened me, telling me to stop working for Dumbledore, or I'd die sooner or later." "Did Malfoy really say that?" Ralph raised an eyebrow. This old bastard was so arrogant now? "Yes, that's what Malfoy said. He seems quite confident," Mr. Weasley said seriously. "Ralph, Hogwarts will be hosting the Triwizard Tournament this term, with other schools participating. It's a mixed bag, so you must be very careful. It's best if you don't participate in the Triwizard Tournament." Ralph neither agreed nor refused, but simply said softly, "I understand, Mr. Weasley. Thank you for your reminder. I will be careful." "Arthur," Mrs. Weasley urged loudly, "Arthur, the train is about to depart. Hurry up and get Ralph on board." "All right, Molly," Mr. Weasley said, then turned to Ralph and said in an even more urgent whisper, "Be very careful." Ralph nodded and walked towards the train. A loud whistle blew, and staff walked along the train, closing all the doors. The Hogwarts Express made a hoarse, gurgling sound as it sped away into the distance. Chapter 536. A small shock from India. Walking through the train passageway, Ralph was still pondering Malfoy's actions. Something was off about him. He was far too arrogant. The old Malfoy was arrogant too, putting the diary in Hogwarts, opening the Chamber of Secrets, forcing the Board of Governors to impeach Dumbledore, and after being kicked out, writing a letter to Dumbledore insulting him. Yes, the old Malfoy was that arrogant, but that arrogance was largely based on his own safety. Malfoy hadn't personally opened the Chamber of Secrets, and no one could prove the diary was related to him. Impeaching Dumbledore was the Board of Governors' prerogative. As for insulting Dumbledore, well, he could insult him back. Would he really be imprisoned in Azkaban for such a trivial matter? Anyway, Malfoy always prioritized safety when doing bad things, always managing to absolve himself of all responsibility. Even his ninth raid on the Quidditch World Cup in his past life was a sneak attack on Muggles in the camp at midnight, and he fled immediately upon seeing the Dark Mark, a clear example of both bravery and cowardice. But this time was different. Malfoy had led a group of Death Eaters to ambush Harry, and even engaged in a direct fight with Sirius, Lupin, and others. Not only was his life in danger, but he also risked being captured. This fearless attitude was something Malfoy had only shown when Voldemort was still alive. This made Ralph increasingly suspicious that Voldemort was with him now. But the problem was, when Voldemort lost his powers, even though he stayed in the Albanian forests, he didn't seek out his servants like Malfoy, precisely out of distrust. There was no reason for the Dark Lord to suddenly start trusting Malfoy now. Ralph pondered this, enjoying the sidelong glances he received. As he passed a box, a girl suddenly jumped out and blocked his path. "Hey, Ralph!" Ralph was startled, but quickly recovered and looked at the witch blocking his way. It was a beautiful Indian girl with 2 long, black braids and a glittering gold bracelet on her wrist. "Hello, Padma, is there something you need?" Padma Pettier was a Ravenclaw student, and she had a twin sister, Parvati, who was in Gryffindor. The 2 beautiful sisters looked exactly alike, but their personalities were completely different. The older sister was somewhat aloof, while the younger sister was more lively, so Ralph could recognize the younger sister at a glance. There was also a more precise way to tell them apart. The older sister had a mole on her left breast, while the younger sister didn't. Of course, Ralph hadn't seen it with his own eyes. Padma had mentioned it last year when she asked him to tattoo a small pigeon on her chest, the kind of invisible tattoo that only appears during strenuous exercise. Hearing the boy's words, Padma said in a resentful tone, "Can't I just say hello if there's nothing wrong?" "Of course you can." Ralph smiled. Padma was a big client. She often brought in sick magical creatures from who knows where for him to treat. "I read the newspaper recently. The Quidditch World Cup is terrifying," Padma said. "Are you alright?" "No," Ralph asked. "Didn't you come to watch the games live this summer?" "No, I've been in India." Padma shook his head. "We Indian wizards aren't really interested in Quidditch. We prefer cricket." Cricket originated in England in the 13th century, but it flourished in the Commonwealth, especially in India, becoming one of the world's most lucrative leagues. In India, both Muggles and wizards enjoy this sport. "Quidditch is so dangerous. You should come to India to watch cricket next time," Padma said, her eyes sparkling as she warmly invited the boy. "Our Cricket World Cup opening ceremony is much more interesting than Quidditch's mascot show." Ralph immediately became interested and asked, "What kind of performances are there?" "Flying broomstick acrobatics," Padma said proudly. "One firebolt can carry 58 wizards, and the person on top can even do a backflip. Isn't it much more impressive than any Lansky feint?" Ralph and Paddle chatted for a while before parting. Before leaving, she insisted on giving the boy a packet of Indian specialties, curry made with Gang's water and cow urine. Ralph quickly found Sherry and Hermione in a box. Neville was also there, fiddling with an Irish badge that was still screaming Troy Mallet Morin. However, the badge's magic was slowly fading, causing the sound to weaken. Ralph sat down in the chair and handed the curry to Sherry, telling her to put it in the box. "What's this?" the girl with the ponytail asked curiously. "It feels soft and squishy. This is a local curry that Paddle gave me. I suspect it's poisonous, so please don't eat it," Ralph warned. "And don't let any magical creatures steal it, especially the greedy Niffler. If it's poisonous, why not just throw it away?" Sherry asked. "I still have a use for it," Ralph grinned. "I'll give it out as a Christmas present to Professor Snape, Aberforth, and Grindelwald. A third for each of them, so they can experience a little shock from India." Ralph then looked at Neville and asked, "Neville, how was your summer?" "Not good," Neville sighed regretfully. "Grandma wouldn't let me watch the World Cup, so I stayed home the whole time." "It's a good thing you didn't go. That night was terrifying," Hermione, reading the newspaper, said with lingering fear. "So many wizards died that night. Mrs. Longbottom is so old, it would have been really dangerous for her if she had gone to the stadium." "No," Neville sighed. "My grandma regretted not letting me watch the game that night after she found out the Death Eaters were at the World Cup. She was so angry she didn't eat for days." "Well, Mrs. Longbottom is definitely a grandmother." Hermione waved the newspaper in her hand and said, "Rolf, did you see the Daily Prophet this morning? It said Lucius Malfoy has been released." "I didn't see it," Ralph said softly. "But Mr. Weasley told me about it just now at the train door, and warned me to be careful." "How could he be released?" Shirley asked in surprise. "Wasn't there McNeil's accusation? The newspaper says Malfoy has an alibi," Hermione read from the newspaper. "He was with Minister Fudge that night, and there are more than a dozen wizards who can testify for him. Probably someone used Polyjuice Potion to transform into Malfoy's appearance," Ralph sneered. "He had already prepared an escape route before launching the attack, so we can't do anything to him?" Hermione asked, somewhat angrily. "Not necessarily," Ralph smiled slightly. "Hogwarts is holding the Triwizard Tournament this year, and I'll have him come and enjoy the competition." Chapter 537 Ralph, Where is my daughter? As time passed, the Hogwarts Express finally arrived at its destination, stopping at the dilapidated Hogsmeade station. Stepping off the train, Ralph looked up at the night sky and saw a torrential downpour, whipped by the wind, pounding the ground relentlessly, as if determined to drown the fish. Ralph thought back and suddenly realized that every time he arrived at Hogsmeade Station for the start of school, it seemed to be rainy like this, a kind of curse, like rain always falling during the college entrance exams. But considering this was England, rain was normal. Standing under the shabby awning, Sherry reached out to catch the raindrops pattering against her palm. She whispered, "What a heavy rain." Ralph also tried to catch the raindrops, and he murmured, "Yes, what a heavy rain. Now is a good time to fish for thunder sturgeon." Thunder sturgeon, as a magical fish that can generate electricity, are particularly active in thunderstorms and are most likely to bite. Ralph, his fishing urge returning, really wanted to take a small boat to the Black Lake and cast his line a couple of times to satisfy his fishing craving. As for whether he'd get struck by lightning, could he even call himself a fisherman if he couldn't fish in extreme conditions? Hearing Ralph's words, Shirley gently drew her wand, pointed it at her palm, then took the boy's hand, palm to palm, and winked mischievously, saying, "Here, this is for you." Ralph looked down and saw a water fish, formed from rainwater, swimming happily in his palm. A gentle smile appeared on his lips as he said, "Shirley, thank you for the gift. I'll take good care of it in the fish tank." The girl with the ponytail smiled happily. In the distance, a familiar shout suddenly rang out. "First-year students! First-year students, come this way!" Hagrid strode over, holding a small pink umbrella. The umbrella wasn't exactly small, but for Hagrid's size, it was indeed tiny, barely covering his head, and his clothes were soaked. Hagrid quickly spotted Ralph and exclaimed, "Ralph, I saw the Daily Prophet. Was the Norwegian Spinosaurus who saved the floating dragon you named Norbert?" Not only Sherry, but even Hermione and Neville looked at Ralph with smiles, especially Hermione, who wore a smug expression. It's understandable why they looked that way. Ralph had told Hagrid years ago that he would take Norbert to the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, live in a grand house, eat rare steaks, and enjoy the boundless grasslands. But Ralph had actually kept Norbert in his trunk. It was like telling someone you were taking their daughter out to enjoy the best treatment in the world, while secretly keeping her hidden away, raising her from a young age. Now that the father had discovered the truth and come knocking, it was naturally very awkward. However, adhering to the principle that as long as he wasn't embarrassed, it was others who were, Ralph brazenly smiled and said, "It's Norbert. Oh, my poor son, he left me when he was just a few months old, a little caterpillar. He didn't look like his mother, but he had my personality." Hagrid sobbed, pulling out a stained handkerchief and burying his face in it. "Seeing him grow up safe and sound. I'm so happy. I wonder if he still remembers his mother." Ralph smiled and reminded him, "Hagrid, Norbert is a female dragon. I told you before." Hagrid looked surprised. He clearly remembered a fire-breathing dragon with a handle. And he'd even flicked its little sparrow. After arranging a meeting time with Hagrid for Norbert, Ralph and his group walked along the rough, muddy road towards the Thestral's carriage. They boarded and sped away, their hooves splashing mud like rain behind them. At this point, only a few students remained on the platform. Harry and Ron didn't leave, they were still looking around, searching for Draco Malfoy. Before, Malfoy was always the one provoking them, but this time it was different, they were the ones looking for trouble. On the night of the Quidditch World Cup, they were attacked, and Ron was so badly beaten he had to be hospitalized for several days to recover. And the mastermind behind it all, Lucius Malfoy, had been acquitted. They were desperate for revenge, unable to beat the older one, they could only go after the younger one. However, Malfoy was ruthless, He'd spent the entire day hiding in the Slytherin carriage, not even going to the toilet, giving them no chance to give him a good beating. This would be their last chance. At Hogwarts, Malfoy would have Snape backing him up. "Hey, Harry Potts," a voice called out. Harry looked up sharply and saw Malfoy standing by the train window, looking down at them. Beside Malfoy stood two chubby guys, Goyle and Crabbe. "You and Weasley have been loitering around the Slytherin carriage, looking for me," Malfoy smiled sarcastically. "Yes, we are looking for you," Harry said loudly. "It's a shame your father wasn't burned to death by Ralph's dragon, but he must have been burned, right? We want to find out more about it." Malfoy's face didn't flush, only a faint blush appeared on his pale cheeks. He said slowly, "If I were you, Potter, I would be extra careful. Although you survived that night, you'll eventually follow in your parents' footsteps. Before that, I'll definitely send your parents to Azkaban," Harry retorted sharply. Malfoy cleared his throat and sneered, "Guess where I am now?" Harry looked at the carriage and suddenly felt a chill. He remembered it was the carriage they had been in before. "Do these suitcases look familiar?" Malfoy picked up a suitcase and placed it on the windowsill, grinning mischievously. "What would happen if I threw it down?" Ron saw it was his own suitcase and glared at him. "You dare?" Malfoy smiled smugly. He unzipped the suitcase, about to dump the contents, but then stopped when he saw something interesting. Ron had a bad feeling, and sure enough, he saw a very unique dress in Malfoy's hand. It looked like a dark purple velvet gown, with a collar trimmed with what looked like moldy ruffles, and matching lace on the cuffs. Rather than a dress, it looked more like a vintage antique. "Look what I found," Malfoy laughed. "Whose thing is this?" "It's definitely yours, poor Weasley." Malfoy let out a series of loud laughs, and Crabbe and Goyle behind him joined in with their rough, grating laughter. "Your family can't afford a new suit, so there's no need to use your great-great-grandmother's clothes, right?" "Ho, go to hell, Malfoy," Ron cursed, his face turning the same color as the suit robe. Harry suddenly raised his wand and shouted, "Expelliarmus!" Malfoy was hit by the spell and sent flying. Harry and Ron quickly went against the flow of people, back up the stairs to the train, ready to give Malfoy a good beating. As for the sorting ceremony, what was that? After an unknown amount of time, the train doors slammed shut, and the train slowly started moving. Chapter 538 The Impartial Snape. Accompanied by the sound of rain and horses' hooves clattering through the mud, the carriage entered Hogwarts, speeding along the wide driveway and stopping beside the stone steps leading to the oak gates. Ralph alighted, climbed the steps, and found the entrance crowded with students, the hall a scene of utter chaos. Peeves floated above, shouting, "You wretched ghosts! You won't let your master Peeves to the Great Hall. You bunch of wizard brats won't get into the Great Hall either." Hell! Peeves opened his mouth with a crack, and with a whoosh, his tongue shot out, its tip sharp and hard, gleaming with a metallic sheen, before stabbing at a rubber balloon. The water-filled balloon burst, cascading cold water onto the students' heads. The surrounding people screamed, pushing and shoving, trying to escape the scene of chaos. Ralph frowned. "Peeves, what are you doing?" Hearing that familiar voice, Peeves nearly fell from the sky. He steadied himself in time, gliding smoothly up and flashing a fawning smile. "Lord Scamander, you're back? It's raining, the ground is all muddy. Little Peeves is washing the floor for you." Everyone stared at Ralph in surprise. It was the first time they'd seen Peeves so respectful to a student. Typical Scamander. There was a reason Peeves was so obedient. Just half a year ago, after seeing Bloodman Barrow transformed into a dead ghost by Ralph's magic, he became terrified. "Thank you for your kindness, but we're heading to the Great Hall," Ralph said. "Of course, I'll be going now," Peeves said, drifting away into the distance. "I hope your studies go smoothly and you graduate soon. I won't bother you any longer." Ralph led Sherry and the others towards the Great Hall. Ginny and Luna blocked their way. Ginny asked anxiously, "Ralph, have you seen Harry and Ron?" "No," Ralph shook his head. "What, they've disappeared again?" "Yes," Ginny said. "After we got off the train, Ron told us to go ahead, saying he was going to cause trouble for Malfoy. But now all the carriages are here, and we still haven't seen them." Luna pulled her head out of the quibbler, her eyes darting around as she looked at Ralph. "They might have been kidnapped by the Lady of the Lake," she said. "They're active in this kind of weather. When I was little, I met a fat woman who said she would take me away. My dad said she was the Lady of the Lake." Ralph was speechless for a moment. To be able to describe a kidnapper in such a refined way, old Loverkid really had a peculiar way of thinking. Has anyone seen Harry and Ron? Ralph asked. I saw it, Hannah said, waving her arm and laughing. Malfoy was standing in the carriage, waving a really ugly tuxedo, and Potter and Weasley rushed onto the train. Rush onto the train, Ginny exclaimed in surprise. Did the train take them away? Maybe. Ralph glanced towards the Great Hall and said, Professor McGonagall is here. We'll talk to her later. Professor McGonagall quickly came out of the Great Hall, but the floor was wet, and she slipped, almost falling. Luckily, Ralph reacted quickly, grabbing her arm and steadying her. Ouch, thank you, Mr. Scamander. It's nothing, Professor, Ralph said, supporting Professor McGonagall's arm, and whispered, Harry and Ron are missing. After hearing the whole story, Professor McGonagall's face darkened. Why was it always Potter and Weasley? Why? I'm busy right now. I have to take the new students to the Great Hall for the sorting ceremony later, Professor McGonagall sighed. I'll have Professor Snape go find them. McGonagall raised her wand, and a silver cat sprang from its dip. It landed, circled once, and nimbly ran towards the Great Hall. A moment later, Snape strode over, dragging his long black cloak, a malicious smile on his face. Snape was walking too fast, and his feet slipped on the wet marble floor, but Ralph didn't help him. Instead, he deliberately took a half step back. So Snape fell flat on his face with a thud, looking utterly pathetic. The students all wanted to laugh, but no one dared to laugh out loud. They all knew that if they laughed, they would be subjected to a year of torment, so they forced themselves to hold it in. Snape got up from the ground, his face darkening without a word. He roared angrily, Who spilled the water? After a moment, Daphne from Slytherin stammered, Professor Snape. It was Peeves. Snape was speechless, forced to swallow his anger, and then shifted his gaze to Professor McGonagall. Professor McGonagall, you just said Potter and Weasley are still on the train, haven't gotten off. That should be it. Professor McGonagall nodded. So I wanted you to go and check, and bring them back. Oh dear. Snape's face broke into an exaggerated smile. So, it seems the famous Harry Potter and his little sidekick Weasley are disgusted with Hogwarts and planning to drop out and go home. No, Professor Snape, Ginny said. They didn't do it on purpose. Shut up, Snape coldly interrupted Ginny, sneering. In their first year, they suspected me of trying to steal the Philosopher's Stone, so they broke school rules and went to the 4th floor's restricted area to steal it, and then they ran into Quirrell. In their second year, they drove a flying car, crashed the Whomping Willow, and fed their classmates poisonous mushrooms. It's always them, and they say it wasn't on purpose. Even Professor McGonagall was speechless now, as every word Snape uttered struck a chord with her. Harry and Ron weren't bad. Professor McGonagall quite liked them, but she liked them even more if they weren't in her own house, like Slytherin. If it's discovered they didn't get off the train, I think they should be punished accordingly, Snape chuckled. For example, deduct 50 points from each of them and put them in solitary confinement, but classes don't start until tomorrow, so we shouldn't deduct points from Gryffindor tonight, right? Luna said. When Potter and Weasley drove their flying car 2 years ago, we used the same excuse to avoid deducting points, Snape scoffed. But did it work? No. It only made things worse. So this time, they must be severely punished, and, if any of my house's students stayed on the train and didn't get off, I would definitely deal with them strictly, Snape said righteously. Professor McGonagall, you are the vice headmaster, not just the head of Gryffindor. You can't show favoritism to your own students. With this label pinned on her, what could Professor McGonagall do? She could only sigh and say, then, as you say, deduct 50 points from each of them and put them in solitary confinement. Snape smiled with satisfaction. Seeing Ralph's expression shift slightly, he asked in a sinister tone, What, Scamander, do you have a different opinion? No, I completely agree with this punishment, Ralph laughed. However, Malfoy, Goyle, and Crabbe seem to be on the train too. So, Slytherin should lose 150 points. Professor Snape, you are truly impartial. You've impressed me greatly tonight, Snape. Thanks to you Renjun for the generous donation. To explain yesterday's situation, I originally posted a chapter, but it was blocked at 7 p.m. before it could be published. I had to repost it, but unexpectedly, 2 hours later, the blocked chapter was reposted at 7 p.m., resulting in a duplicate chapter. Sigh, I really didn't mean it, and I apologize to all the readers. Chapter 539 The Triumph of the Three Kingdoms. At Professor Snape's suggestion, even before the official start of the school year, and before the banquet even began, Gryffindor and Slytherin had already combined for 250 points, taking the lead in the House Cup standings. No wonder he's Hogwarts' most impartial teacher. From now on, if anyone says Snape favors Slytherin, Ralph will be the first to object. This news quickly spread throughout Hogwarts, and the previously cheerful lions and snakes fell silent. However, the smiles didn't disappear, they all shifted to the Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw students. Professor Flitwick also grinned, even raising his glass to clink with Professor Sprout's. Seeing the two opening champagne so early, Dumbledore almost couldn't contain himself, secretly wondering, what's wrong with Severus? Why is he resorting to this kill 800 enemies, lose 1,000 of his own strategy? Hufflepuff has won the House Cup for 3 consecutive years. If they're going to take it all down, they should go after Hufflepuff. The deductions this academic year came earlier than usual, causing Professor McGonagall, the headmistress of Gryffindor, considerable distress. She had waited 3 years, then another 3, then another 3, almost 10 years. If she could just hold on a little longer, she could become the headmistress of Hogwarts, yet Gryffindor still hadn't won the House Cup. Starting with a negative 100-point buff was like playing basketball with the opponent leading by 20 free throws at the start. The referee practically wanted to become CP3 and play 8 against 5. Professor McGonagall felt incredibly frustrated. After the song ended, the entire hall erupted in cheers, but Professor McGonagall remained silent, still grieving. The Sorting Hat, noticing Professor McGonagall's troubled expression, asked, "Little McGonagall, what's wrong? Was my singing that bad?" "No," Professor McGonagall sighed softly, "I'm just a little upset. Tell me your little girl troubles, let me cheer you up, help you share your worries," the Sorting Hat said, adopting the demeanor of a caring older sister. Professor McGonagall's lips twitched slightly when she heard the Sorting Hat call her a little girl, but given the Sorting Hat's age, everyone was still a child. She quickly brought up the House Cup. "That's it," the Sorting Hat chuckled. "You just want the House Cup, right? I have a plan that will guarantee you the House Cup this year." "What plan?" "Hufflepuff House has won the House Cup for the last 3 years, hasn't it?" The Sorting Hat grinned. "You transfer to their house and become head of house." "Oh, the head of house is Sprout now, so you can be the vice head." Hearing the Sorting Hat suggest joining if you can't beat them, Professor McGonagall really wanted to pickle it with potatoes and then wash it thoroughly with the water from the Black Lake of 82. Professor McGonagall ignored the Sorting Hat and picked up the list, letting the new students enter for the sorting. She secretly prayed that this year's Gryffindor would also have a formidable student like Ralph. However, halfway through the sorting, a deafening clap of thunder suddenly sounded outside the window, followed by the great hall door being slammed open. A man stood in the doorway, leaning on a long cane, draped in a black travel cloak. His flamboyant entrance naturally attracted the attention of many. He removed his hood, revealing a head of long, gray hair, and began to walk towards the faculty table. Each step he took, the wooden prosthetic leg beneath his feet creating a hollow sound that echoed through the hall. He walked straight to the end of the main seating area, turned right, and limped towards Dumbledore. Another flash of lightning struck the ceiling, illuminating the man's face in stark contrast. It looked as if carved from a piece of rotten wood, its face scarred and battered, its mouth a large, crooked gash, a large chunk of its nose gouged out. Most terrifying were his eyes, one small, black, the other large, round like a coin, a vivid, bright blue. For a moment, the entire hall fell silent. A stranger approached Dumbledore, extending a hand as scarred as his face. They shook hands lightly, and Dumbledore asked, "Was the journey smooth?" "Alastor, fine, Albus." "The only danger was thunder?" Alastor Moody replied in a low, hoarse voice. "It drowns out the sound of spells being cast, and the only advantage of rain like this is that it saves us the trouble of bathing." "That's good. Sit down and rest for a while, dinner will be served soon." Dumbledore gestured for Moody to sit in an empty seat on his right, and the sorting continued. However, no one paid attention to the new students, everyone stared intently at the terrifying-looking man. The sorting ended, and Dumbledore stood up, smiling slightly. "Please allow me to introduce our new defense against the dark arts teacher, my longtime friend, Professor Moody." The applause was sparse, for Moody's crooked mouth and frightening appearance instilled fear in the students. Moody paid no attention, instead constantly scanning his surroundings, especially the blue eye that kept moving, darting up and down, left and right, then flipping back and disappearing into the head, leaving only a large white eyeball visible. This sight was even more terrifying. Dumbledore cleared his throat and continued, "There's a second thing. Quidditch matches will be cancelled this year." The students buzzed, like the hissing of small flames. Hogwarts had very few recreational facilities. Besides Quidditch, there were only niche games like Goblin Rock and Wizard's Chess, and now they were simply cancelling them? They all stared at Dumbledore with their mouths agape, seemingly too shocked to speak. "If there are no matches, what are we going to play?" George shouted. "Are we going to let go of the prank toys?" Fred added. "No, you two realize," Dumbledore smiled, "not only are you not allowing it, but you're adding dozens more prohibited items, like that screaming pom-pom you're holding, and that toothed flying saucer. Don't hide it, they're all forbidden." The students burst into laughter, while Professor McGonagall glared at George and Fred, then strode over to them, ready to confiscate the contraband. The two looked like they were about to cry. "Although there won't be a Quidditch match, there's a major event starting in October and continuing throughout the school year, which will take up a lot of your time and energy," Dumbledore continued. "That's right. I'm very happy to announce that the Triwizard Tournament will be held this year at Hogwarts." "Are you kidding me?" Fred exclaimed. Dumbledore chuckled softly. "I'm not joking, Mr. Weasley, but since you mentioned jokes, I've heard a rather amusing one. It's about a troll, a she-devil, and a goblin, all of whom ended up in the same tavern." Professor McGonagall, holding the screaming ball and the toothed flying saucer, cleared her throat loudly. "Oh, perhaps it's not appropriate to talk about this now," Dumbledore said. "Some of you don't know what this Triwizard Tournament is all about. So, I hope those who do will forgive me for explaining it briefly." I'm allowing their brains to wander for a moment. Dumbledore quickly began to explain the Triwizard Tournament, emphasizing the past death toll. This death toll, of course, didn't just refer to the 3 champions, but also to professors and spectators. A large number of people died watching each tournament, so the fact that it was suspended for over a century was indeed quite normal. But the students in the Great Hall weren't worried. What did the people who died over 100 years ago have to do with them? Just as Dumbledore was finishing his explanation, the Great Hall door was kicked open for the second time that day. Snape stormed in, soaking wet, followed by Harry, Ron, Malfoy, and his 2 henchmen. "Fuck you," Snape roared, furious. "I searched 20 miles for these 5 brats. I almost drowned in the Black Lake. This damn weather, I'm not going out looking for anyone again." You'd rather die? You'd rather die than go out. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 540: The Temptation of Warriors. If Professor Snape had only turned pale when forced to deduct points from Slytherin before, now he was truly radiating fury and rage. His face, in particular, was flushed red, more vibrant than a freshly painted coffin. Everyone was terrified he'd suddenly turn around and strangle Harry and the others. Harry, Ron, and Malfoy, the trio, stood trembling behind Snape like lackeys, barely daring to breathe. "Severus, you've had a hard time. Go back to your room and change into clean clothes," Dumbledore said. "As for the 5 of you, return to the table." Snape snorted harshly, glared at them fiercely, and then left the Great Hall. After the Great Hall quieted down again, Dumbledore cleared his throat and continued, "Where was I? Oh, 1,000 galleons. The winner will bring honor to their school, and personally receive a prize of 1,000 galleons." Dumbledore smiled slightly. "In October, the headmasters of Boxburtons and Durmstrang will lead their carefully selected competitors, and the selection ceremony for the champion will be held on Halloween." Dumbledore looked around, and the students he saw puffed out their chests. "Anyone can apply, but only one student will become the champion of Hogwarts," the students whispered among themselves. "Tonight, there's one last thing." Dumbledore opened his arms in a welcoming gesture, his deep voice echoing in the Great Hall. "Enjoy the feast." All the empty plates suddenly overflowed with food, and the atmosphere in the Great Hall instantly became lively. Harry and Ron, soaking wet, found an empty seat at the Gryffindor dining table. Their faces were covered in bruises and swelling, clearly indicating a story or incident. They expected everyone to be curious about what had happened, especially Ron, who had mentally drafted several short essays about beating up Malfoy and kicking Goyle on the way there, but no one cared about him at all. Everyone ate their meal, excitedly whispering to their neighbors about the Triwizard Tournament. "What are you talking about?" Harry couldn't help but ask. "What Triwizard Tournament? What champion, Hogwarts, Bookspittons, and Durmstrang are going to hold the Triwizard Tournament?" Dean Thomas exclaimed excitedly. "Each school will select one student to participate." "Why participate in this?" Ron asked, biting into his pie. "I mean, what's the benefit, Ron? Becoming a champion is a great honor." Seamus laughed. "The champion also gets 1,000 galleons as a reward." 1,000 galleons? Ron was stunned by the number. He was so excited that a small piece of pie got stuck in his throat. Ron coughed a few times, choking off some of the crumb, before recovering. Then he exclaimed excitedly, "Merlin, such a large reward?" He had never seen so many galleons in his life. In fact, most of the time, his family's vault only had a pitiful few galleons. The most they had was 700 galleons when they won the Daily Prophet's grand prize last year. However, his whole family quickly went to Egypt and spent all those galleons. "I want to participate," Ron said excitedly in a low voice, his face beaming at the thought of the potential honor and fortune. "My dear little brother, everyone wants to participate," George said, shaking his head. "That's right," Fred said, giving a thumbs up to himself. "That means you'll be competing against us." Ron fell silent. "How do you become a champion?" Harry asked. "What do we compete in? If it were a competition of exam scores or potion making, he certainly wouldn't be selected, but if it were a competition of riding a flying broomstick, he had a good chance." "I don't know," Fred shook his head. "Dumbledore didn't say." Hermione didn't participate in the discussion. She ate her dinner while staring at a rune dictionary on a milk jug. Seeing Hermione's calm demeanor, Ginny thought she must know something and asked, "Hermione, do you know how champions are chosen?" Everyone looked at Hermione. She was Gryffindor's famous know-it-all. There was nothing she didn't know. Hermione nodded as expected. "You can think of it as a sorting of champions, similar to the Sorting Hat, but I can't go into more detail." Lavender Brown wanted to know more, so he deliberately asked, "Which book says this?" Seeing everyone looking at her, Hermione suddenly smiled. "It's not from any book, Ralph told me." "How did he know?" Dumbledore and the headmasters of Bookspittons and Durmstrang were in Berlin this summer discussing the resumption of the Triwizard Tournament, Hermione explained. "Ralph was there and even attended the meeting." Everyone seemed greatly shocked, but Ron thought it was boasting and said skeptically, "Hermione, we all know Ralph is remarkable, but how could they let a student like him attend a meeting of 3 headmasters? Ralph isn't just a student, he's a renowned wizard with international renown." Hermione looked at Ron sharply and retorted, "He can even attend the International Confederation of Wizards Congress and give an important speech. Isn't it normal for him to sit in on the 3 headmasters' discussions about the Triwizard Tournament?" In fact, Headmaster Bookspittons originally proposed that participants must be at least 17 years old to participate in the tournament, but it was Ralph and she who argued for it and removed that restriction. The students looked at each other, increasingly shocked. Many young wizards, let alone international affairs, didn't care much about even British current events. Their daily conversations revolved around what to eat, how much summer homework they'd done, or Quidditch and other recreational activities. The International Wizarding Federation and the Ministry of Magic were too prestigious and distant to them. They were unaware of Ralph's current international reputation and still considered him just a slightly more famous student. They couldn't imagine that Ralph could sit down and meet with 3 headmasters and change their decisions. It was simply amazing. Harry suddenly remembered that Percy had been praising Ralph throughout the summer, hoping to use him to connect with officials from the Ministry of Magic and the International Wizarding Federation. He'd been quite surprised then, and now he understood even more deeply. "I love Ralph," George laughed. "Luckily, the age limit was removed. We won't be 17 until next April, by which time the competition will probably be almost over, but that means Ralph can also apply," Ginny said with a grin. "There's only 1 spot per school." Ginny's words were like ice water poured over everyone's heads. They then realized the harsh truth. Hogwarts only had 1 champion. What right did they have to be champions? To put it more bluntly, who could snatch the champion spot from Ralph? Many students, after their initial excitement, also realized this and gradually quieted down, turning to look at Ralph. For a moment, it seemed as if the entire Great Hall was focused on one person. The boy, however, sat quietly at the Hufflepuff table, eating his meal, thanks to River of Time for the generous donation. Chapter 541 Moody's Suspicion. After the dinner, Dumbledore and Moody returned to the headmaster's office together. Moody sat under the chair, his magical eye darting around. The portraits of the headmaster all stared at it, pointing and whispering. Dumbledore waved his wand, and a cup of nectarine tea appeared on the table. This magical plant, from India, was said to help relieve fatigue and induce sleep. The headmaster didn't offer Moody a cup. His old friend was always cautious and never drank tea offered by others in private. Albus, in the upcoming Triwizard Tournament, 2 Death Eaters will be roaming Hogwarts, Moody said in a hoarse voice. Even during the height of the Wizarding Wars, this never happened. Aren't you being a bit too overconfident? Aren't you worried about what might happen to those young wizards? Alastor, Severus was indeed a Death Eater, but he joined our side before Voldemort's downfall, risking great danger to spy for me, Dumbledore said calmly, taking a sip from his cup. He's no longer a Death Eater. You really trust Severus Snape? Moody asked, his eyes filled with suspicion. Of course. What reason do I have not to trust him? He has never disappointed me in anything I've asked him to do. Dumbledore looked at Moody, his expression serious. I hope you can trust him too, Albus. Not everyone has the talent to excessively trust others. I was once as naive as you. Moody let out a cold laugh from deep in his throat, then pointed to the missing piece on his nose and said gruffly, remember what happened? Evan Roger did it. That's right. Moody's mouth twisted, his eyes sharp and filled with hatred. I brought him into the Auror office, helped him become a full-fledged Auror, and raised him like my own son. I poured my heart and soul into it, but how did he repay me? The blast curse and Avada Kedavra. I was lucky I didn't die. So, he deserved to die at my hands. Since then, I will never fully trust anyone. Trust can lead to death, let alone someone like Snape, a former Death Eater. A leopard can't change its spots. Moody's lips twisted into a terrifying smile. My dear Albus, nothing can change a person's nature, including your excessive trust. That's why I brought you here. Alastor, Dumbledore put down his teacup and rubbed his temples. Keep a close eye on Karkaroff for me. Karkaroff, Moody scoffed. I thought you'd trust this guy more than Snape. Why do you think that? Karkaroff betrayed so many of the Dark Lord's servants to save his own life. He can't go back, Moody chuckled. His life, his honor, his fate are all tied to you. How could he dare betray you again? No, Karkaroff is the real chameleon and coward. Dumbledore shook his head. He'd betray his companions to save his own life, and he could easily switch allegiances for the same reason. Moody was silent for a moment, his eyes thoughtful. All right, I'll keep a close eye on them both, naturally included Snape. However, Dumbledore had no intention of persuading his stubborn old friend, he just needed his help. By the way, Albus, something gives me a bad feeling, Moody suddenly said. An attack on the Quidditch World Cup, Dumbledore asked, his eyelids lowered. That's right, Moody nodded, his eyes clouded and his tone full of doubt. How many years has it been since the Death Eaters have been active on such a large scale? Ever since the Dark Lord disappeared, they've been hiding in the shadows, afraid to be seen in the light. Because Voldemort has returned, Dumbledore said gravely. In fact, he returned from Albania last year with the help of Peter Pettigrew, but Peter was killed by Ralph, and Voldemort was forced to self-destruct and escape. Hearing Dumbledore's words, Moody frowned and asked, Newt's grandson, Ralph Scamander, is he really as powerful as you say? Of course, Dumbledore smiled smugly. Ralph has had several face-to-face encounters with Voldemort in the past 3 years, and he has always come out on top. I can tell you more about it when I have time. Moody raised his eyebrows and asked again, so, you think this large-scale movement of the Death Eaters is related to the Dark Lord? Yes, Dumbledore said seriously, I have a feeling that this time, and his actions will be different from before, therefore, I hope you can teach those students some real skills, Alastor. They're too weak. In all these years, they've only had one reliable professor. Sirius, since you put it that way, then I'll teach them something beyond the textbook, Moody chuckled. Like what? Dumbledore asked calmly. Let them experience dark magic, Moody said with a smirk. And some even more evil forces? Dumbledore put down his cup, crossed his arms, and squinted in thought. Albus, you yourself said the Dark Lord might rise again, Moody said with utmost seriousness. We need to let them know what real danger and cruelty are. Dumbledore didn't answer immediately. Moody looked at the hesitant headmaster and snorted coldly. dissatisfied. "You can't let these children come into contact with these things when war comes, can you?" "It'll be too late then." Dumbledore sighed and nodded almost imperceptibly. Moody smiled contentedly, but the smile quickly vanished. His previously swirling magic eye rolled back its blue pupil and disappeared into his head. "Someone's here to see you. Looks like I've taken up too much of your time." Moody stood up, slowly pushed back his chair, and walked towards the door. Ralph stood at the door, about to knock, when it creaked open and Professor Moody emerged. The boy, surprised to see Moody there, quickly said, "Good evening, Professor Moody." Moody stared at Ralph, then glanced at the black leather case in his hand, nodded, and limped towards the spiral staircase. Ralph waited until Moody was out of sight before entering the headmaster's office and sitting down. Dumbledore had already poured the boy a cup of drunkard tea. He rested his chin on his fingertips, his eyes gazing at the boy through his half-moon spectacles. "Ralph, it's so late. Is there something you need?" Ralph nodded, placed the case on the desk, opened it, and waved his wand, sending a golden statue flying out. "Professor, not long ago, Shirley and I went to the Ravenclaw tombs, and we found this statue." Chapter 542 The Fourth Wooden Coffin. Dumbledore peered through his half-moon spectacles at the three-headed, six-armed mermaid statue, scrutinizing it closely for a long time, his blue eyes gleaming brightly. "It's a statue of the three mermaid sisters, Parcelope, the Sirens, and Scylla." Ralph and Sherry had discussed this possibility privately, but without any evidence, so he asked in a low voice, "How did you figure it out?" "Appearance?" Dumbledore waved his wand, and a large stone flew out of a wooden box, landing on his desk. Ralph noticed a brightly colored mural carved on the stone, in a grand hall, a two-tailed mermaid holding a scepter, the lower half of the painting depicting a group of marine magical creatures kneeling before her. Ralph compared the mural of the two-tailed mermaid with a golden statue, and after a moment, pointed to one of the heads, saying, "She looks very much like the mermaid in the mural." "Yes, very much so, so I concluded they are the same mermaid," said Dumbledore. "Where did you get the mural from?" Ralph asked. "The Golden Mermaid Clan." Dumbledore grasped his teacup, swirling the rim with his fingers, inhaling the intoxicating aroma, as if the tea itself could intoxicate. He squinted and said, "It's the family of Marcella, the two-tailed mermaid I asked you to help cure last year." Ralph asked in surprise, "So, she's Persepolis?" "That's right, the eldest of the three sisters, Persepolis." Dumbledore took a sip of tea and nodded. "She loved the ancient Greek wizard Odysseus and left Avalon to pursue him. The Golden Mermaid Clan are descendants of Persepolis, hence the many murals depicting her. This is one of them." "So," Ralph pondered, "the other two heads are Sirens and Scylla, respectively." "I think so, though I've never seen them." Dumbledore focused his gaze on the statue, then looked down and saw the mermaid's 6 hands, each holding a cross, a chest, a sickle, and 3 torches. The old man frowned slightly. "But the cross, the box, the sickle, and those 3 torches, I don't know what they symbolize." "Rolf, I remember you said that Ravenclaw left you a secret chamber 1,000 years ago. Since this statue was also left by her, perhaps there's an answer inside." Ralph nodded. "I asked Helena, and she knows the entrance to that chamber." "I'll make time to go there." "That's good." Dumbledore smiled. "Speaking of symbolism, I do know the purpose of the torches," Ralph suddenly said. "Oh," the old man adopted an attentive expression. "When Sherry and I found this statue, its torches were burning. We touched the statue and entered a mist," Ralph said. "Mist?" Dumbledore narrowed his eyes. "A thick fog, and through it, I could hear people cursing, wailing, and weeping." Ralph recalled his experience in Ravenclaw's tomb, slowly saying, "Sherry and I followed the sounds, and the fog quickly dissipated. We found ourselves at Hogwarts, and even encountered a wizard named Tertius. He had clearly died not long ago." Dumbledore, after hearing the boy's words, spoke with deep astonishment. "Ralph, from your description, I believe this statue led you and Sherry into Tertius's illusion. It has such an ability, it's truly astonishing." Seeing the old man's shocked expression, Ralph asked, "Didn't you enter an illusion before?" "I did, but that was my own illusion, not someone else's." Dumbledore shook his head. "How did you get in?" Ralph asked curiously. "With the invisibility cloak." "The invisibility cloak?" Ralph raised an eyebrow. 13 years ago, I found an invisibility cloak at James Potter's place." Dumbledore sat in his chair, gently responding to the boy's questioning gaze. Ordinary invisibility cloaks are travel cloaks woven from the illusion charm or the fur of an invisible beast. They make one invisible at first, but over time, they gradually become visible again. But James's invisibility cloak is very ancient and permanently effective, maintaining its invisibility. Knowing the reason, Ralph said softly, "It's one of the Deathly Hallows." "That's right," Dumbledore nodded. "When I asked James, he told me that this invisibility cloak had been passed down through generations in his family, originating with Irons Peveril. Irons was the only child in the Peveril family that generation. She had no brothers, so she inherited the family's invisibility cloak. Irons later married Hudwin Potter, and from then on, the invisibility cloak passed from the Peveril family to the Potter family, and has been passed down through generations. And Irons Peveril is a descendant of the third brother in the story of the three brothers, Ignatius Peveril. So I'm certain that the invisibility cloak is a Deathly Hallow." Dumbledore rose and slowly paced around the room. "I didn't really have much interest in the invisibility cloak, because I can become invisible very well, so it's useless to me. But according to legend, a wizard who possesses 3 Deathly Hallows is the true conqueror of death. So, I borrowed it and studied it for a while, and then I discovered." Ralph looked at Dumbledore and murmured, "It can enter the illusionary realm?" "That's right, the invisibility cloak, like this mermaid statue, can enter the world of the dead," Dumbledore said solemnly, "but the invisibility cloak can only enter its own illusionary realm, far less than this statue, which can travel to other people's illusions. This ability is almost like..." Dumbledore paused, then exclaimed, "Death." Ralph didn't speak, but pondered where Ravenclaw had gotten this treasure from, and why she had placed it in her tomb. "Besides this statue, have you found anything else in Ravenclaw's tomb?" Dumbledore asked. "A golden apple tree, like Grindelwald's elderberry, comes from Avalon," Ralph said softly. "And a wooden coffin, with a symbol of the Deathly Hallows engraved on the lid. I heard from my grandfather that he saw a similar coffin in the Centaur tribe." "Have you seen it, Professor Dumbledore?" "I haven't seen it, but I've heard of it," Dumbledore said calmly. "In fact, it's rumored that Hogwarts also has such a coffin." Ralph looked up sharply at the old man. "It's been passed down orally from headmaster to headmaster that somewhere deep within Hogwarts Castle, there is a wooden coffin," Dumbledore said. "This coffin provides Hogwarts with magic, allowing it to function on its own, so for thousands of years, the castle has never received external power." Ralph was speechless with shock. If this legend was true, then this was already the 4th coffin. Chapter 543 Rolf, did you go on a date with Ms. Grey last night? Ralph had personally seen 2 wooden coffins bearing the markings of the Deathly Hallows, one in the ghost ship and the other in Ravenclaw's tomb. He had also heard of 2 other coffins, one in the Centaur village and the other deep within Hogwarts Castle. The increasing number of coffins fueled Ralph's curiosity about their sheer number and the identities of those inside. Of course, what surprised Ralph most was Dumbledore's statement that the magic sustaining Hogwarts Castle originated from a single wooden coffin. In fact, he had heard Nico mention this years ago. Nico had consumed so many Philosopher's Stones, enough to fill a large pool, just to power his manor and the magic well. Hogwarts Castle also required a vast amount of magic. The accumulation over millennia was astronomical. Ralph had considered many possibilities, even speculating whether there was a mountain of Philosopher's Stones deep within Hogwarts, but he never imagined the source would be a coffin. Was Hogwarts generating electricity from corpses? Ralph had heard of making soap from corpses, and of using corpse oil to make instant noodles and spicy snacks, but he had never heard of generating electricity from corpses. It just goes to show how strange the magical world truly is. Ralph stayed in the headmaster's office for a long time, not returning to the common room until late at night, thus missing the Hufflepuff's house party. As the house closest to the kitchen, Hufflepuff held a separate welcome party every year after the opening banquet. The next morning, Ralph got up early and arrived at the Great Hall, where he saw Cedric distributing timetables. He greeted him with a smile. "Here's your timetable," Cedric said, pulling out a piece of paper and handing it to Ralph. "Thank you, Cedric." Ralph placed the timetable on the table and said softly, "I ran into Mr. Diggory at the Quidditch World Cup. My dad told me about it." Cedric grinned. "He's been praising you, especially after the World Cup final. He saw the Daily Prophet and said you were really amazing." Ralph waved modestly, then sat back down and chatted with Cedric about the Ministry of Magic and the Death Eaters. The two chatted for a while. Seeing no students nearby, Cedric cautiously asked, "Rolf, Where did you go last night? I went to the headmaster's office. Professor Dumbledore wanted to see me about something. Ralph noticed Cedric's strange expression and asked, puzzled, what's wrong? You'd better explain to everyone. Cedric lowered his voice. Everyone's saying you went to Ravenclaw Tower and had a date with Lady Grey. Ralph, who had just taken a sip of milk, almost spat it out. He coughed a few times, and after catching his breath, asked, who started this rumor? Even if they said Ralph went on a date with Sherry, that was still a rumor, but at least it was somewhat plausible. Saying he went on a date with Helena, a ghost, what kind of date would she have? No wonder so many students looked at him with admiration when he left the common room. Their gazes contained that kind of emotion. Ralph turned to look at the fat monk. He was the only one in the entire Hufflepuff house who knew that his relationship with Helena was unusual. It wasn't me who said that. The fat monk quickly waved his hand, clarifying, it was Bloodman Barrow who said it. He broke into the Hufflepuff common room last night looking for you, but couldn't find you, so he suddenly went crazy. Yelling that you must be with Helena. I'm just telling everyone that Helena is Lady Grey. Ralph sighed. Half a year ago, at Christmas, Bloodman Barrow stumbled upon Helena and himself, bathing naked in the hot springs. Seeing Barrow's madness, Ralph used his basilisk eye to petrify him. During the summer vacation, Professor Sprout brewed mandrake herbal water to restore Barrow, but he didn't expect Barrow to come looking for trouble again so soon. Like a toad that doesn't bite, disgusting. Just then, a rustling sound came from above them, and more than 100 owls flew in through the open window, bringing everyone the morning's packages. A large, tawny owl circled, swooped down on Neville, and tossed a package onto his lap. Hannah, with her hair in 2 ponytails, asked, Neville, what did you forget this time? Everyone knew Neville always left something at home before school started. Once he even forgot his wand. I forgot my homework. I wrote to Grandma on the train yesterday. Luckily I made it in time. Neville sighed softly and asked, what's our first class again? Ralph glanced at the timetable. Professor Sprout's herbology class. Neville hurriedly unpacked his bag, looking for his herbology homework, but after searching several times, his smile vanished. Oh no, I can't find my herbology homework. Grandma put all the homework for other classes in here, but she forgot about herbology. Grandma's memory was indeed better than Neville's, but not by much. After breakfast, the group left the Great Hall and headed towards the greenhouse. The rain that had fallen all night had finally stopped, but large, dark, bluish-gray clouds still swirled in the sky. The group crossed the meadow and saw that the Gryffindor students had already arrived and were standing at the greenhouse entrance, enthusiastically discussing the Triwizard Tournament. Hermione saw Ralph and quickly walked over. Seeing Neville looking preoccupied and frowning, she asked, Neville, what's wrong? Mrs. Longbottom delivered Neville's homework by L. Ralph said, suppressing a laugh, but there's no herbs class. Professor Sprout quickly approached, carrying a large bunch of keys, which she gently jingled. The third greenhouse, the students followed Professor Sprout, laughing and joking, into the third greenhouse. Many dangerous magical plants were grown here, but because they had been there so many times, almost no one was nervous or afraid. Led by Professor Sprout, they passed through a cabbage patch piled with dragon manure fertilizer and arrived at a patch of damp soil. On that land grew extremely ugly magical plants. They didn't resemble plants at all, but rather large, black, sticky slugs, emerging straight from the soil. Each one was slightly wriggling, and covered with many large, shimmering pustules, seemingly filled with liquid. A bird flew over and pecked at one of the pustules, which suddenly burst open like pimples on a face, thanks to the 3 generous donors, Silly Young Man, Moonbay Hot Spring Pass, and Sunflower in the Wilderness, for their generous donations. Chapter 544 The Beastly Ralph. A large puddle of yellowish-green liquid splattered onto the ground. The liquid was slippery, sticky, and emitted a pungent gasoline smell. Justin asked with disgust, what is this? Pus secreted by the barbotuber, Mr. Finchley, Professor Sprout said. Squeezing the pus into a bottle is the main task of your class today. Oh, Merlin, this work is disgusting, Macmillan complained, covering his nose. Why do we have to do this? Good question. Professor Sprout looked at the students and asked, does anyone know what the pus secreted by the barbotuber is used for? An arm immediately shot up. Professor Sprout didn't see who it was, but that didn't stop her from calling out, Miss Granger. Hermione recited quickly, as if reciting a memorized text, The pus secreted by the barbotuber is the best medicine for treating stubborn acne. That's right, Cryfinder gets 2 points, Professor Sprout nodded. The potion made from the pus of the baboon tuber, when applied to the face, can eliminate pimples and acne, something you need most at your age. As soon as these words were spoken, a buzz of whispers filled the greenhouse, many students beaming with joy, because their faces were already covered in pimples like mushrooms after rain. But the key is not to squeeze them with your hands, Professor Sprout warned. That will leave red or dark brown marks, or even scars. Never squeeze pimples. Seamus Finnegan, who was vigorously squeezing pimples in front of a small mirror, immediately put the mirror away upon hearing Professor Sprout's words. And, don't believe any magic that can quickly clear up pimples, Professor Sprout said seriously. The face is delicate, don't cast any spells on your face. Oh, poor Eloise Midgen, Hannah sighed, and the other Hufflepuff students nodded in agreement. What happened to her? Hermione asked curiously. Eloise wanted to use a spell to get rid of her pimples this morning, Ron explained in a low voice, but she had to cut off her nose. Neville said with lingering fear, I was planning to learn a spell from Eloise to remove the bumps on Raffer's skin, but I didn't expect it to be so dangerous. Raffer, who was resting with his eyes closed on Neville's head, couldn't help but shudder upon hearing this. What a close call. Professor, can the pus from baboon tubers remove freckles? Ron suddenly raised his hand and asked. Besides their ancestral red hair, the most distinctive feature of the Weasley family was their freckled faces. When Ron was young, he thought they were beautiful, a unique mark of the Weasley family, but as he grew older, he increasingly found those chicken dung-like brown spots covering his cheeks incredibly ugly. Sometimes Ron was even afraid to look in the mirror, afraid that the freckles on his face would disgust him. I'm sorry, Mr. Weasley, Professor Sprout glanced at Ron's freckled face and shook his head. Baboon tuber pus won't get rid of freckles, Lavender Brown chuckled. My suggestion is to apply more concealer, like you, Ron asked. I haven't put anything on my face, Weasley, Lavender scoffed. I'm completely bare-faced, then why are your neck and face 2 colors? Harry asked, puzzled. The students laughed. Lavender glared at Harry and Ron, then whispered among herself and a group of witches, including Parvati. Their voices were low, only faint phrases like sisters, who knows, and Japanese men are really something could be heard. All right. Quiet down, Professor Sprout said loudly. Speaking of concealer, baboon tuber pus has another use. Does anyone know it? This time, not even Hermione, let alone Neville, a student specializing in herbalism, knew. Only Ralph thought for a moment and raised his hand to answer. Baboon tuber pus also has a whitening effect. The cosmetics used by witches, whitening lotions and concealers, etc., contain baboon tuber pus. That's right, very good, Mr. Scamander, Professor Sprout praised with satisfaction. Hufflepuff plus 5 points. Hearing that baboon tuber pus was in cosmetics, many witches showed disgust on their faces. It felt like eating a delicious meal and then being told afterwards that it was rat meat, so disgusting. Lavender Brown even screamed in shock and hurriedly pulled a wet handkerchief from her pocket, trying to wipe the stuff off her face. Actually, there's nothing to be afraid of, it's just the pus from the tubercle of the baboon, Ralph said. Like lipsticks containing the corpses of cochineal insects, lip balms containing crushed parasitic beetles, many perfumes containing whale excrement, and some shampoos containing bull semen and cockroach extract. Seeing the group of female students turn pale, Professor Sprout quickly interrupted. Alright, that's enough, Ralph. She just didn't want these girls to be wearing heavy makeup at their age, but she also didn't want to see them afraid to even use everyday skincare products. Hermione leaned closer and whispered, Ralph, how did you learn such obscure knowledge? I learned it from Marjorie, Ralph said in a low voice. She used to brew some skincare and makeup potions to sell to Hermione's students. She asked me to help her catch cockroaches and other small insects, so I learned a bit from her. Hermione suddenly stared at the boy, her eyes gleaming with interest, and asked, so, you can brew skincare and shampoo potions too? A little bit, Ralph replied doubtfully. What, you want to learn? Hermione nodded like a chick pecking at rice. She did want to learn this. With a foundation, she could try to develop a powerful, quick smoothing hair serum that could keep her hair smooth for several days. I can teach you, but, Ralph looked Hermione up and down, grinning. Do you think it's reasonable if you don't offer something in return? Hermione looked wary. What do you want me to do? Nothing much, Ralph chuckled. Just keep brewing potions for me. In her second year, Hermione lost a bet and was conscripted by Ralph as free labor. In her third year, she used the time turner and attended over 10 hours of classes a day, so Ralph felt bad about bothering her anymore. But now Hermione's schedule was back to normal, giving her plenty of free time. Taking advantage of Hermione might be beastly, but not taking advantage of her would make Ralph even more beastly. Hermione glared at Ralph, slapped his palm hard, and gritted her teeth, saying, "Deal, thanks to the generous donation from Tiger with cheat code." Chapter 545 Professor McGonagall, the Fault Hinderer. Under Professor Sprout's guidance, the students picked up dragon skin gloves and bottles and began collecting pus from the baboon tubers. However, while collecting the pus seemed simple, various problems arose in practice. Everything else was manageable, but the biggest trouble was that the baboon tubers were covered in pustules. When squeezed, each pustule sprayed out like a ripe pimple. Not only was the pus extremely precious, but every drop was a serious waste, and if it splashed onto themselves or others, it could damage their skin. Ralph, Hermione, and Neville, working as a group, easily collected 3 bottles of pus without injury or waste. Professor Sprout was very satisfied and gave them extra house points. Hannah hurriedly wiped the sweat from her brow and asked in surprise, "How did you do that?" "Yes," Susan replied, her face covered with a rag. She didn't want to be disfigured at such a young age. Many people looked at them, wanting to learn their pimple-squeezing technique. "Be gentle, not too rough," Ralph said, raising his right hand. "Watch my technique, I'll demonstrate." The boy picked up a plump, liquid-filled, bun-shaped bamboo tuber and gently stroked it, his movements incredibly soft, almost without force. Under Ralph's caresses, the soft, pinkish tip of the bulge gradually hardened. The boy pinched it between his thumb and forefinger and slowly rubbed it. Ralph kneaded and manipulated it for about 10 seconds, then placed a glass bottle over the bamboo tuber and gently squeezed it. Liquid, like milk, gushed from the swollen bulge. The young wizard seemed to have opened the door to a new world, eager to try Ralph's demonstration, the dragon claw hand technique. However, whether by accident or intentionally, Lavender and Ron both pointed their bamboo tubers at each other when extracting the pus. Lavender and Ron were splattered with pus by each other, while Harry, who was helping out, was also covered in the sticky liquid. All 3 were taken to the school hospital. After her biology class, Gryffindors went to protect magical creatures class, while Hufflepuff students rushed to the transfiguration classroom. The Ravenclaw students were already there. Sherry sat quietly in the front row, intently reading Transfiguration Today. Rolf, carrying his suitcase, sat down beside the girl. She looked up, sniffed, and asked, "Why does it smell like gasoline?" "To be precise," Ralph explained, pulling out his books, "summer homework, and quill. It smells like the pus from a baboon tuber." He deliberately flicked his sleeve near the girl's nose and chuckled, "Smells good, doesn't it?" Sherry smiled faintly, shaking her head. "It doesn't smell good, then let it disappear, let the smell dissipate." Ralph raised his wand and waved it at himself. After the smell was magically removed, he said softly, "Actually, I quite like the smell of gasoline." Sherry tilted her head, looking at Ralph with an adorable expression that said, "Don't lie to me, I'm not well educated." "Really?" Ralph explained with a smile. "Gasoline contains aromatic hydrocarbons, which stimulate sensory cells and create a certain kind of pleasure. Muggles call this the abuse and addiction of volatile organic solvents. However, inhaling too much is not good for your health and is addictive. Of course, while some people are addicted, others hate the smell of gasoline and diesel. Just like cilantro and durian, there are those who love and those who hate them." Seeing Shirley propping her chin up in a daze, Ralph picked up a quill and tapped her delicate nose with a phoenix feather, asking, "What are you thinking about?" Shirley snapped out of her reverie, wrinkling her nose. "I was thinking about the addiction to volatile organic solvents you mentioned earlier." "Oh, you have an addictive scent too?" The girl with the ponytail looked embarrassed. After a moment's hesitation, she mustered her courage and said, "I like your scent. It's addictive, but not dangerous, and even good for your health." Ralph grinned, grasped Shirley's ponytail, pulled it to his nose, and sniffed it deeply, saying softly, "I like your scent too." Shirley blushed, gave him a light glare, and said, "That's a nice thing to say, but I heard an interesting rumor this morning." Ralph's smile froze. He quickly explained, "I went to see Professor Dumbledore last night. I didn't go on a date with Helena. It's all a rumor, don't listen to their nonsense." Shirley laughed. "I know you didn't. I actually meant to talk about the rumors surrounding Eloise Midgen's nose. Ralph breathed a sigh of relief, but the girl with the ponytail murmured, "But why does everyone insist on spreading rumors about you and Helena?" Ralph, suppressing a laugh, looked at the slightly jealous Shirley and whispered, "If I kiss you in front of the whole class right now, everyone will definitely start spreading rumors about us." Seeing the boy's eager pounce, Shirley's cheeks flushed slightly, and she quickly said, "Stop it, what are you two doing?" A familiar voice suddenly rang out. The boy and girl were startled and turned to see Professor McGonagall standing in front of the table, her lips tightly pressed together, watching them. Neville sighed. He had coughed a dozen times, and his voice was almost hoarse. Ralph and Shirley were so engrossed in their whispered conversation that they hadn't heard his warning at all. Ralph quickly suppressed his laughter, turned around, and sat up straight, saying, "Professor McGonagall, we were just discussing human shapeshifting." Shirley nodded guiltily. Professor McGonagall glared at Ralph. Not only had she taken advantage of her carefully cultivated jade cabbage, but now she was even teaching her to lie. Professor McGonagall picked up the boy's summer homework from the table and began to read it. After only a short while, she nitpicked, "Mr. Scamander, your paper on changes between non-animals is rather mediocre. The abstract is a bit bloated, the review doesn't mention previous work, and where is your innovation?" Ralph's scalp tingled. He immediately recalled his undergraduate graduation in his previous life, when his thesis defense professor asked him about the innovative aspects of his paper. Would a four-legged chair turning into a three-legged one count as innovation? Professor McGonagall had given Ralph a thorough dressing down, but still gave him an "Oh, excellent," which left Ralph speechless. McGonagall could have just found fault directly, but she chose the homework as an excuse. He was devastated. The young wizards were all too afraid to breathe. Even a bright student like Scamander had been criticized like this. Professor McGonagall seemed to be in a bad mood. Just as the bell rang, Eloise Midgen returned to the classroom. Madame Pomfrey had replaced her nose, though it was slightly crooked, as if she'd been punched. Everyone's attention finally shifted from Ralph to her. Professor McGonagall strode to the podium, her expression serious. In herbalism, there's a technique that allows you to graft a branch or a bud of one plant onto the stem or root of another, so that the two parts grow into a single, complete plant. Herbalists call this grafting, and in transfiguration, there's also a way to graft one object onto another. We call it the transfiguration charm. In this lesson, I will teach you the transfiguration charm. Chapter 546 Rove's Little Scheme. Professor McGonagall began explaining the conversion charm, and the blackboard quickly filled with dense writing. With decades of teaching experience, Professor McGonagall's handwriting was beautiful, the layout elegant and varied. If Hogwarts held a blackboard writing competition, she would undoubtedly be the champion. Snape and Hagrid wouldn't even be worthy of shining her shoes. However, while the writing was beautiful, the content itself was complex, difficult, and tedious. At least for many students, this was the case. They recognized each word individually, but when combined, they simply couldn't understand it. If it were a history of magic class, everyone would already be in a half-time break, dozing off and then waking up again, but in Professor McGonagall's class, no one dared to sleep. The transfiguration charm was too difficult to understand. Susan rubbed her sleepy eyes and asked for help. "Hannah, what's the twin magic theorem?" Hannah tugged at her two braids, her face contorted in pain. "I don't know either. I spaced out for a few seconds on the edge effects of magic, and then I couldn't understand anything at all." She was almost forgetting the words magic and transfiguration. Hannah nudged Neville with her elbow, wanting to ask him if he understood, but Neville was still staring at the blackboard notes from 20 minutes ago, trying hard to concentrate. He suddenly exclaimed excitedly, "I understand. I finally understand the difference between shapeshifting and magical transfiguration." Hannah and Susan sighed softly. They couldn't keep up in the first lesson. What were they going to do? Fourth-year transfiguration was definitely not a field for those of them who hadn't even reached mastery in their third year. They looked at Sherry and Ralph, who both seemed to be calmly following Professor McGonagall's pace, even answering questions and earning points for the house. This must be at least a fourth year, or even peak fourth year, level of transfiguration magic. It's terrifying. After Professor McGonagall finished explaining the theory, she said loudly, "You already know the spell. Next, I need you to transfer the hedgehog's quills to the eggplant. Let me see how well you do." Ralph quickly received his hedgehog. The little guy was quite large, but very timid. As soon as he touched it, it curled up, its head facing its belly, its body shrinking into a ball, covering its head and limbs, its body covered in steel-like quills. He waved his wand and tapped the hedgehog. A row of quills quickly appeared on the old eggplant. Although there weren't many, he succeeded. Ralph couldn't transfer too many quills at once because the transfer spell became increasingly difficult to control as the number of objects increased. Forcing the transfer would easily injure the hedgehog. The boy glanced at Sherry. She didn't do anything but took out a few pieces of chicken jerky from her pocket and fed them to her hedgehog. Sherry was a transfiguration prodigy. She had been secretly studying with Professor McGonagall for the past few years, and had even completed the entire 7th-year transfiguration curriculum a few months ago. Ralph knew the ponytail girl's transfiguration skills were high, but he wasn't sure exactly how high, so he asked, "Sherry, how many thorns can you transfer at once?" Sherry thought for a moment and shook her head. "I don't know, I've never tried." "Try it now," Ralph chuckled. "Let me see." The girl nodded, drew her wand, and tapped the hedgehog. In an instant, all the dense thorns on its body disappeared, appearing on an eggplant. Professor McGonagall understood Sherry's transfiguration level. She knew the conversion charm was no challenge for her. Seeing this, she calmly said, "Very good, Miss Swinton has completed the conversion charm. Ravenclaw, 10 points." Hearing Professor McGonagall's words, everyone looked towards the front row and saw the bald, large rat-like hedgehog on the table. Many students didn't even understand what the conversion charm was. Some had succeeded, but only managed to convert a few thorns onto the eggplant. They simply couldn't do what Shirley had done. The students buzzed in shock. Ralph sighed as well, finally understanding the phrase people often heard about him. The difference between people is sometimes greater than that between dogs. But the boy quickly became happy and proud again. "Ah, my Shirley is amazing." Professor McGonagall quickly stepped down from the podium to check on the students' progress. "Mr. Macmillan, if you keep messing with that hedgehog like that, I'll put you in solitary confinement." "Miss Lisa Dupin, the eggplant is for practicing the conversion charm, not for playing around with like that." "Mr. Justin Finley, I must remind you, I picked the eggplant from the greenhouse. It wasn't washed, and it still has dragon manure on it. Don't eat it." "Ugh." The students, feeling dizzy, endured until the bell rang and ran towards the great hall. Near the fire, Ralph and Sherry ran into Hermione, who had just finished class but looked disheveled, with a small burn hole in her sleeve. "Hermione, what happened?" Sherry asked with concern. "Ugh, don't even mention it," Hermione sighed. "Hagrid made us raise a bunch of Blastales in the magical creatures protection class just now." Blastales. Hearing this name, Sherry paused, then asked, "What are those?" She had been Ralph's assistant for 3 years and knew quite a bit about magical creatures, but she had never heard of such a creature. "A very ugly magical creature," Hermione complained in an extremely disgusting tone. "Those things are also very dangerous. They burn, sting, and bite. I don't know where Hagrid got them. They're magical creatures that Hagrid bred himself," Ralph said. "As for what magical creatures he used to crossbreed them, I still don't know." Hearing that Blastales were a crossbreed of magical creatures, Sherry was very surprised. "Isn't that forbidden by the Ministry of Magic?" "That's right, it's forbidden," Ralph nodded. Back in 1965, the Ministry of Magic passed the Animal Breeding Experimentation Prohibition Act. This seemingly minor task was actually overseen by Newt back then. If Hagrid is discovered by the Ministry, he'll at best be placed on probation again, and at worst, sent to Azkaban, Ralph said seriously. "Therefore, as friends, we must stop Hagrid. We can't let him continue down this path, teetering on the edge of crime." Seeing the boy's righteous indignation, Hermione couldn't help but applaud. "So what should we do?" "Of course, we'll confiscate those Blastales, including the magical creatures that bred them," Ralph said with a "if I don't go to hell, who'll" look on his face. Just like we confiscated Norbert, Sherry and Hermione both gave Ralph sly looks. His plan was so shrewd, not only they, but probably everyone at Hogsmeade could hear it. Thanks to bookfriend 202003283061848 and Knife Mountain Sword Tree Du Kefin for their generous donations. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 547 Female Voldemort? Rove's little scheme was indeed quite grand, but it was also understandable. To a magizoologist, magical creatures are like beauties of all shapes and sizes, each with their own unique charm. Who wouldn't want to add them all to their harem and pamper them day and night? Rove wanted it too. Not to mention that the Blastales were someone else's wives, which made him even more excited. He couldn't wait to tell the Blastales, "My box is quite big. You can sleep when you're tired of playing, it's okay." If there was any mistake, it was that Rove only made the mistake that all magizoologists in the world would make. However, when Wednesday's magical creatures protection class arrived, Rove saw the Blastales outside Hagrid's cabin and immediately lost interest. They were too ugly, he couldn't bring himself to eat them. They looked like deformed, shell-less lobsters, grayish-white and slimy, with many fleshy feet growing diagonally upwards, making it hard to tell if they were legs or antennae. They also emitted a very strong smell, much like dead fish and shrimp that had been sun-dried for days. Compared to the bobtail snails, even Ghoul seemed pretty, and even a she-devil with a face full of warts could be considered gentle and charming. The Dementor's passionate kiss didn't even sound so scary. Rolf only glanced at them a few times before waves of nausea washed over him, and he immediately lost the idea of keeping the bobtail snails in his box. Shirley looked at Rolf and secretly chuckled. He gently poked the girl's cheek with his finger, and she laughed even more happily. Many students were disgusted by the bobtail snails, but Hagrid clearly didn't think so. He even thought the bobtail snails were interesting and cute creatures. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" Hagrid looked at his bobtail snails with fascination and said gently, "A group of weak, docile little guys, what a miracle of life," but the truth was quite the opposite. The bobtail snails were neither beautiful nor docile. They were already fighting, piled on top of each other, constantly spitting out sparks from their anuses or heads. As for their fragility, everyone really wanted to give the Blastale a good stomp on to prove Hagrid right then and there. "Your job is to feed them," Hagrid said, pointing to the food on the shelf in the distance. After the past few days of lessons, the Gryffindor and Slytherin students have confirmed that Blastales don't like eggs and beetles, and eating rat entrails will give them diarrhea. Today you need to try something else. I've prepared ant eggs, frog livers, and emerald snakes. Take a little of each and see if they'll eat them. But the students all scrambled for rat entrails, seemingly intending to kill the Blastales with diarrhea that way. During the feeding, they discovered another problem. The Blastales seemed to have no heads. After careful examination, the students discovered that they ate and excreted in the same place, and would eat and excrete at the same time. The Blastales would also occasionally shoot out sparks, accompanied by crackling sounds, and their bodies would propel them forward a few inches. "The sparks burned me," Justin said angrily, showing Hagrid a burn on his hand. "Ah, yes, their sparks are indeed dangerous," Hagrid nodded, "but they're also very beautiful, like fireworks, aren't they?" Seeing Hannah reach for the suckers of the Blastale, Hagrid warned. "Those things suck blood." Hannah quickly pulled her hand back, exclaiming in horror, "How terrifying." The Blastales were not only dangerous, but also very picky eaters. Neville threw slippery frog livers into the box, but they refused to eat, hissing and spitting out large bursts of sparks. Ralph quickly replaced them with a green snake and threw it into the box. Upon seeing this, the Blastales let out noisy screeches, darting around in the box, fighting over the food, tearing the snake meat into small pieces no bigger than a finger joint. Two larger Blastales fought each other over a piece of good meat, sparks flying everywhere. Rolf had no choice but to separate them by hand, but in the process, he used too much force and snapped off the claw of one of the blast-tailed snails with a crack, blood gushing out. Suddenly, a ding sounded in the boy's mind. One injured blast-tailed snail detected, triggering side quest 1, help the blast-tailed snail reattach its broken leg. Reward, magic, brilliant fireworks, use magic to create flames that spew from its anus. Each time flames are ignited, the body can lunge a short distance. The larger the flame, the farther the lunge. Side quest 2, capture a blast-tailed snail. Reward, magic, gender conversion. Blast-tailed snails do not have a fixed gender. When two blast-tailed snails duel, the loser will become female and can conceive. When the host fights a wizard of the same sex, casting gender conversion will, under the influence of magic, give a certain chance of transforming into the opposite sex when the opponent is defeated. Ralph stared at the gender conversion spell, completely stunned. Was this the legendary win with reward, lose with punishment? How twisted, but he liked it. Ralph remembered having acquired the magic of the spirit cat, which allowed him to create clones after being attacked. If he cast gender conversion during a fight with his clone, and won, would the clone become a girl? Ralph's thoughts drifted further and further, even contemplating the idea of a female Voldemort, or making a deal with Snape to get him a Harry Potter for fun. Hagrid walked through the crowd, quickly arriving beside Ralph and smiling. How was it? Surprised by this lesson, Ralph and Sherry exchanged a glance. It was more like a shock. Hagrid, how are these blastales cultivated? Ralph asked. Hagrid glanced around and lowered his voice. It took me 60 fire crabs to impregnate that sphinx-like creature and get it to give birth to these blast-tailed snails. 60 fire crabs against one sphinx-like creature? Hagrid, you're a beast. Ralph thought for a moment and then asked, is it the sphinx-like creature you found in the Forbidden Forest? Yes, Hagrid nodded and sighed. After giving birth to these blast-tailed snails, her temper has become increasingly volatile. Now even I'm afraid to go near her. You'd better not go to the Forbidden Forest recently, Ralph inwardly scoffed. Having been subjected to a barrage of 60 fire crabs, how could that sphinx-like creature not be in a terrible mood? Hagrid, you've violated the prohibition of animal breeding experiments law, Shirley warned. If the Ministry of Magic finds out, you could lose your job, or even be imprisoned in Azkaban. Hagrid glanced around furtively and whispered, no, if anyone asks, I'll say the Sphinx and the fire crab bred spontaneously in the wild. And it has nothing to do with me. Hagrid looked at Ralph, a sly smile flashing in his eyes, and said, I asked your grandfather, and he said finding hybrid magical creatures isn't illegal. Chapter 548 The Hogwarts Dance Teacher. The Animal Breeding Prohibition Act, as its name suggests, prohibits the artificial breeding of new magical creatures, but it does not interfere with the mating of wild animals. This is quite normal. No matter how much a wizard interferes, can they really control who a magical creature mates with? Most magical creatures don't interbreed with different species, just like what normal person would be attracted to a beautiful chimpanzee. Of course, there are exceptions. Some wizards don't even spare dolphins, snakes with their teeth pulled, or snails, let alone goats and lizards. Their main motivation is novelty. Therefore, Hagrid's insistence that he found the blastale would at most result in its confiscation, but he wouldn't actually be punished. This is a loophole in the act, even if it's not a loophole. However, while Hagrid seems to have won the blastale, he has lost his reputation. Last year, when the hippogriff attacked Malfoy, to save its life, with Ralph's help, Hagrid exercised extreme restraint, and the magical creatures he taught were all animals that students liked, such as unicorns. Hagrid won the favor of many young wizards. But without Buckbeak's crisis this semester, he let himself go and squandered the good reputation he had built up over the past year in less than 3 days. Hagrid also became the second worst professor at Hogwarts in the shortest amount of time. As for the worst, of course, it was Professor Snape, without a doubt. He still maintained his habits of arbitrarily deducting points, his bad temper, and his sarcastic remarks. It would be strange if he could be liked by students. However, surprisingly, Snape used to vent his own sarcasm on the new defense against the dark arts professors as revenge for them taking his position. Quirrell, Lockhart, and Sirius all suffered different degrees of targeting and ridicule from Snape. Quirrell and Lockhart, in particular, were hospitalized for a long time, allowing Snape to enjoy being a temporary professor for a few months. But Snape didn't do that this year. Instead, he seemed quite wary of Moody. Even when eating in the Great Hall or brushing past Moody in the corridors, Snape avoided Moody's eyes, whether it was the enchanted eye or the normal one. The young wizards were puzzled. Why didn't Snape, with his usual workplace bullying, dare to use it on Moody? There must be a story behind it. Soon, a group of students dug up information about Moody, a veteran Auror, a master at catching dark wizards. He filled half the cells in Azkaban, a war hero. The young wizards then understood why Snape was so timid. He was afraid of being caught and sent to Azkaban. Everyone looked forward to defense against the dark arts class even more. After all, the Auror's identity alone was enough to fascinate the students, not to mention Moody's other accolades. On Friday morning, Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw finally welcomed their first defense against the dark arts class. All the students arrived at the classroom early. Even the laziest little badger didn't want to miss it. The bell rang quickly, and accompanied by the sound of heavy footsteps, Moody limped into the classroom. Passing Hannah, he saw her flipping through Dark Powers, a guide to self-defense. Moody said gruffly, "Kids, put the thing away." You don't need children's books in my class." The young wizards exchanged bewildered glances as they packed the book into their bags. Many of them found the book difficult. Yet Moody called it children's literature. Moody took out the roster, shook his head, and brushed his long, graying hair away from his contorted, scarred face. He began calling roll. His one normal eye moved down the list, while his demon eye darted back and forth, scrutinizing each student who answered. When Moody called on Ralph, he looked up, his eyes scanning the boy. He paused for a moment, then continued calling names until the last student answered. Moody then said, "A little over a month ago, I received a letter from Professor Dumbledore, inviting this retired old man to teach you defense against the dark arts at Hogwarts, but I declined." "Why, Professor Moody?" Macmillan asked boldly. "Do you think we're not qualified to learn from you?" "Of course not, child." Moody's magical eyes turned to Macmillan. "All wizards in England graduated from Hogwarts, including myself. Many of you are geniuses. How could you not be qualified to learn from me?" "It's just," Moody paused, then continued gruffly, "you may know that I was an Auror before I retired, and I've never worked as a teacher. I don't know how to teach students." "How could that be?" Susan exclaimed, her face full of admiration. "My aunt said that most of the Aurors in the Auror office were taught by you." "You are the greatest Auror ever, Miss Burns." "Your aunt is Amelia Burns, isn't she?" Moody said. "To be honest, she's giving me far too much credit. However, I have indeed trained quite a few Aurors," Moody said in a hoarse voice. "But teaching Aurors and teaching students are completely different things." "How are they different, Professor Moody?" Ravenclaw's Michael Corner asked doubtfully. "Aren't they both about teaching magic?" "No. Aurors will face all sorts of terrible dark wizards and dark magic in the most extreme environments," Moody said in a deep voice. "Therefore, they learn real killing techniques." Moody looked at all the students and said coldly, "But you are just playing house in the safety of Hogwarts, learning some pretty but impractical dances." "I'm sorry, I can't think of a better word to describe it. Albus hired a cripple like me to teach you to dance, and it will only end up being a disaster." "We weren't dancing," Justin retorted. "We've mastered quite a bit of magic, learned how to deal with boggards, red hats, Kaba, and Grindylow, those dangerous dark magic creatures." The rest of the class murmured in agreement. Moody stared at Justin expressionlessly. "Oh dear, boggards, red hats, how terrifying. So, you're just swinging wooden toys around under the professor's protection, dealing with a few low-intelligence magical creatures, and that's considered dangerous?" Moody scoffed. "Have you ever seen piles of dead bodies? Have you ever encountered an Avada Kedavra flying inches above your head? Have you ever fought a death battle with a group of Death Eaters?" Moody looked at the class and said firmly, "If you haven't done any of that, what right do you have to call it dangerous?" The entire classroom fell silent. Chapter 549 Moody's Defense Against the Dark Arts Class. Mad-Eye Moody, having served as an Auror for decades, possessed an intangible, commanding presence. Combined with his already menacing appearance, this only intensified his menacing aura, causing many students to tremble in fear. Moody softened his tone slightly, saying, "I wrote to Albus about my ideas, hoping he would find you better dance teachers, not Aurors like me who only know how to teach killing." But Albus replied, "Wanting me to teach you according to Auror standards, to show you what real danger is, to understand what dark magic is like. He believes this is necessary because the wizarding world is becoming increasingly dangerous, and a new war may break out again." Hearing Moody suddenly mention war, the students were startled. After all, the word seemed so distant. "Isn't the wizarding world very safe now?" Hannah hesitated, then whispered, "Where would there be a war? Safe." Moody waved his wand, projecting a picture of a wizard onto the blackboard. The man looked shifty-eyed and bald. Everyone recognized him as Peter Pettigrew. The image shifted again, revealing a colossal skull composed of countless emerald green dots blooming above the Quidditch World Cup. The image quickly transformed into a chaotic stadium, a harpy pinned to a wall, Ralph standing before her, covered in blood, surrounded by terrified wizards. This was the headline photo from the Daily Prophet, one the students had seen during the summer holidays, and seeing it again now, they all looked at Ralph with fear. "Mr. Scamander, I wasn't at the Quidditch World Cup that night, but I heard about what you did," Moody said, turning to Ralph. "Even if I were there, I couldn't have done better." "I thank you on behalf of the Aurors," Ralph nodded politely in response. Moody then stared intently at the crowd. Peter Pettigrew, the Death Eater who escaped last year, the Quidditch World Cup a few weeks ago, the dark mark reappearing. Now, Who among you still thinks the wizarding world is safe? Hannah fell silent. Moody said in a deep voice, therefore, Dumbledore and I both believe that we must tell you what dark magic looks like. The sooner you know what you're dealing with, the better. How can you protect yourself in the face of something you've never seen before? Moody paced around the classroom, his prosthetic leg making a clattering sound. If a wizard is going to cast an illegal spell on you, he won't tell you his intentions. He won't cast it frankly, fairly, or politely. You must be prepared and vigilant, Moody suddenly shouted, startling everyone. So, does anyone know what kind of magic this is? Moody waved his wand again, and another image was projected onto the blackboard. Surging black flames, like bouquets blooming in the night sky, quickly formed a dragon-like monster, swirling in the sky, and finally spreading its wings and crashing to the ground. Ralph glanced at it briefly, then raised his hand. Moody pointed at him and said, "Mr. Scamander, that's a fiend fire spell," Ralph said. "A high-level dark magic that produces a massive, blazing magical flame that indiscriminately destroys anything in its path." "Ah, yes," Moody said approvingly. "You've probably already recognized where this is, haven't you? Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, France." Ralph looked at the photograph and said softly, 70 years ago, Grindelwald led a group of sorcerers here, and he used a fiend fire spell, nearly destroying all of Paris." The students gasped in shock. In their worldview, wizarding combat consisted of spells like Expelliarmus, Tooths on a Club, and Ironclad Charms. They had never imagined that a wizard could destroy a city with a single spell. Was he even human? He was like a god. And then, Justin pressed impatiently. Was Paris ultimately destroyed? If it was destroyed, how could it still exist now? Moody said softly. Back then, it was thanks to the efforts of Nicholas Flamel, Newt Scamander, and dozens of Aurors that the fiend fire curse was stopped, saving Paris. The classroom fell silent, then quickly erupted into excited chatter, like a swarm of bees buzzing. Many hadn't heard of Grindelwald, but this wizard sounded far more powerful than Varian. Moody waved his wand again, and another picture appeared on the blackboard, a male wizard lying on the ground, his face contorted in pain, his entire body convulsing, his fingernails digging bloody lines into his skin, a horrifying sight. Neville, who usually only spoke up in herbology class, trembled as he raised his hand. Moody's magical eye darted around, fixing on him. "Speak," he said. "Mr. Longbottom, it's the Cruciatus curse," Neville said softly but clearly. "Yes," Moody gazed intently at Neville, sighing softly in a sorrowful tone. "My child, your father is Frank Longbottom, and your mother is Alice Longbottom, right?" Neville nodded. "My child, your parents and I were colleagues, fighting side by side. They were very brave, courageous and proud like lions. I admired them greatly," Moody said. After an awkward silence, Neville managed to say, "Thank you." Hannah had heard Neville mention his parents before. She quietly grasped his fingers and tugged at them comfortingly. Moody's magical eye saw this scene through the table, but said nothing, instead waving his wand again. This time, the image was even more terrifying. A blinding green light flashed, so bright it was impossible to open one's eyes. Ralph squinted, staring at the Avada Kedavra, and couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. Because the Avada Kedavra curse changed direction several times, linking the 7 wizards together like a web, connecting them one after another, until finally all 7 fell to the ground dead. "This is the Avada Kedavra curse," Moody said, looking at his uneasy students, his crooked mouth twitching, a hint of disbelief in his eyes. "The mysterious man killed 7 wizards instantly with a single killing curse. We still don't know how he did it. When we arrived at the scene, only 7 corpses and this camera remained. Everyone looked on in fear, and one witch couldn't help but scream, her voice shrill and terrified. These spells, even if you know the incantations, you can't cast them. So why am I showing them to you?" Moody said, looking at the crowd. "Because you must understand them, know how terrifying they are, so that you can be vigilant when you encounter them in the future," Moody roared. "In a while, I will take you to the Forbidden Forest to fight and kill some truly dangerous magical creatures. I know many of you have never seen blood, and are even afraid of it, but I don't want your first encounter with blood to be on the battlefield. Remember, only those who can kill can save lives." Chapter 550 Helena, Ralph, see you tonight. During the remaining time in Defense Against the Dark Arts class, the students were busy taking notes, writing down all the different kinds of dark magic that Moody had described. Those terrifying photos truly opened the eyes of these naive young wizards. It was as if a group of keyboard warriors who spent their days discussing which was more powerful, the Su-57, J-20, or F-22, had suddenly learned that weapons like the Imperial Star Destroyer, the two-dimensional foil, and the water droplet existed. They were naturally stunned. After class, the young wizards gathered in small groups, discussing those terrifying dark magic spells with awe. The Fiend Fire spell is really powerful. Yeah, it's a pity it didn't destroy Paris. Those damn French. Who is Grindelwald? Why does he seem even cooler than Mystic? Someone like that can't be a nobody, right? Compared to the Fiend Fire spell, I still prefer Avada Kedavra. It's so cool, taking down so many enemies in one go. Everyone actively discussed various dark magic spells, even making sharp comments about the two generations of Dark Lords. If you didn't know better, you'd think this was Azkaban High School. As for the Expelliarmus spell, although many students weren't proficient at using it, that didn't stop them from classifying it as something even a dog wouldn't use. Of course, what everyone was most looking forward to was Moody's promise to take them to the Forbidden Forest. The Forbidden Forest, as the name suggests, a forest forbidden to enter, a point Dumbledore emphasized every year at the start of the school year. Good students would naturally abide by the school rules and not go to the Forbidden Forest, but with repeated emphasis, everyone inevitably became curious about it. It was like a beautiful woman shrouded in black veil. The more she concealed herself, the more people wanted to see her. Now, with the opportunity to go, they were naturally incredibly excited. After leaving the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, Ralph and Sherry headed to the library, but halfway there, they were stopped by the fat monk. Ralph greeted them, then introduced the girl with the ponytail. Sherry, this is the ghost of our Hufflepuff Academy, the fat monk. Sherry smiled and said, hello, Cardinal, I've heard Ralph mention you before. Every year, the fat monk would emphasize to the new students that he was a cardinal, but they always ended up calling him the fat monk. So, hearing this incredibly beautiful girl call him Cardinal, the fat monk beamed. Hello. Miss Swinton, you have excellent taste. Recognizing me as a cardinal at a glance, fat monk, what can I do for you? Ralph interrupted. The fat monk's expression suddenly froze, and he glanced at Sherry hesitantly. The girl looked at the boy understandingly and said, Rav, I'll wait for you up ahead. Rav gently took the girl's hand, held it tightly, and shook his head, saying, no need. Fat monk, I have nothing to hide from Sherry, just tell me. The fat monk thought to himself, you're the one who wants me to say this, and gritted his teeth, quickly saying, Ms. Gray told me to tell you, tonight at 11 o'clock, the school library, don't be late. Afraid of ending up like the blood-soaked barrow, the fat monk quickly floated upwards, making a hasty escape. Once he reached a corner, the fat monk was still panting heavily, still shaken. Nick, nearly headless, floated over. He looked at the fat monk, puzzled, and asked, it's just delivering a message, why are you so scared? Just delivering a message, the fat monk shouted, craning his neck. Seeing a student looking over, he quickly lowered his voice, which ghost doesn't know that Bloodman Barrow likes Lady Grey? Now you're delivering a message for another man on Lady Grey's behalf. If he finds out, is this a joke? I'm scouting for you, Nick said nonchalantly. Barrow isn't even nearby, but that little girl named Shirley Swinton is right there. I'm really afraid that if Ralph gets angry, he'll treat me the way he treated Barrow, the fat monk sighed. He wasn't planning on going back to the Hufflepuff common room anytime soon. His life was more important. Oh, that particularly beautiful Ravenclaw witch? Nick asked with interest. He had seen Shirley in the Great Hall, such a beautiful girl. Even he, who wasn't particularly interested in the living, remembered her vividly. It's her, the fat monk sighed. I gave Ralph a wink, and he told me to say it in front of her. You said it? Nick asked, arms crossed. What else? The fat monk sighed. So, now you understand why I'm so afraid, right? In the fat monk's eyes, Ralph was clearly a two-timing scumbag, only able to remain in power by playing both sides. But now that the fat monk had exposed him, he was naturally furious and wanted to find a way to retaliate. Great, Nick, almost headless, exclaimed excitedly. I wanted to see rivers of blood, rivers of blood. The fat monk looked horrified. It can't be that bad, can it? It can't be that bad, Nick sneered. Women can be terrifying when they take revenge. Remember Sir Patrick? He was a scumbag. He slept with several women and was eventually beheaded by the Duchess and hung on the city wall. Tisk tisk, it's better that he's dead. Nick grinned wickedly. That way, Ralph and Lady Grey will both be ghosts, and there will be no obstacle. But that little girl named Sherry isn't bad either, the fat monk mumbled. She just called me Cardinal. I feel that Ralph and Sherry are a better match than that Ice Queen. Lady Grey, you've been won over by a title, Nick said disdainfully. Ghosts help ghosts, you know. The fat monk didn't speak but couldn't help but offer a prayer for Ralph. However, compared to the fat monk and Nick's expectations, Ralph and Sherry did not experience a river of blood. Instead, they calmly headed to the library. As they approached the library entrance, Rove couldn't help but ask, Sherry, aren't you going to ask Helena why she wanted me to come to the library in the middle of the night? I know, it's to find the secret room Professor Ravenclaw left for you, right? Sherry said softly. What if it's not about that? If it's not, it's not. Sherry blinked her bright eyes. Can I stop you from going? We can go together tonight, Rove said. The three of us can go find Ravenclaw's secret room together. No, Sherry shook her head gently. She didn't invite me, Rove laughed, lightly flicking her ponytail. Okay, then go to bed early tonight, don't stay up late. The girl with the ponytail softly hummed in agreement, lowering her eyes and secretly twisting the hem of her clothes between two fingers. Rove watched this scene, his eyes full of smiles, thanks to the generous donation from. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all, see you in the next video.